Phoenix Nights. Chapter 1203. That's right, it was recorded in the telegram that Prince Hardenbarter had suddenly declared himself king and replaced King Shiza. He had also announced to all of his subjects and commoners that from today onwards, Turpan would declare war on the 5-star army. When this sudden news came out, the intelligence department immediately started to investigate the reason. They didn't want to send a telegram to Wu Nanking without any head or tail. Because of this, they were a little late, which caused the loss of the Mongolian cavalry. However, Yang Chidong could not blame them. After all, the news needed to be confirmed and they needed to find out the reason. It was normal for them to report it in the evening. Moreover, he did not expect such a thing to happen in Turpan either. After returning to the tent, he looked at the contents of the telegram. Hardenbarter had actually used force to open the gates of the royal palace and seized power. At the same time, he was shocked and blamed himself. How could a kingdom surrender so easily without even firing an arrow? He had actually believed it. Looks like I was too careless. Things went too smoothly and I became too arrogant. I have to pay attention to this in the future. While Yang Chidong was reflecting on his actions, the other generals had also entered the tent. After everyone stood still, they looked at Yang Chidong expectantly, waiting for him to give the order to attack. Yang Chidong suddenly stood up and bowed 90 degrees to everyone as he said sincerely, "Everyone, this time this king was wrong. I'm sorry." This sudden apology scared the generals so much that they were dumbfounded. Following this, they all knelt on the ground and cried out, "Your Majesty, please take back your apology. We can't accept it, we can't accept it." It was no wonder that these generals, who killed people without blinking and would not even tremble in the face of an enemy's army, were afraid. In ancient times, how could an emperor apologize to his subjects? This was the special nature of feudal hierarchy. Even if the emperor had made a mistake, it was already a great thing to be able to issue an edict of self-reproach. Who knew how long he would be praised for this? Not to mention, Yang Chidong had bowed and apologized. His sincerity was even more evident. Even Beta Persei, who was standing on the side, was shocked for a moment and also knelt on the ground. Yang Chidong was now their king, their master. Where was the logic of a master apologizing to a servant? This was unheard of. Among the generals, Narisong knelt on the ground with tears in his eyes. He was indeed angry just now. Of course, he was not angry at Yang Chidong, nor did he dare to be angry at Yang Chidong. He was angry because Turpan went back on their words. He only wanted one thing, to attack the city and avenge their brothers who had died. Narisong Chidong, at this moment, Narisong Chidong, Narisong's his heart. With such a king, even if Narisong Chidong died in the charge, he could close his eyes in happiness. Yang Chidong sincerely apologized. In the modern army, if the commander of an army did something wrong, he would also have to write a reflection. If the matter was serious, he would also have to publicly apologize. This was something that Narisong Chidong was used to. He never thought that this move would cause such a big reaction from everyone. Yang Chidong sighed. After lamenting the different environments and different concepts under different systems, he had no choice but to sit back down on the chair. Then, he raised his right hand. "All right, everyone, get up." When the generals heard this, they quietly raised their heads. When they saw that Yang Chidong had returned to his chair, they all let out a long sigh and got up from the ground. But at this moment, everyone lowered their heads. In their opinion, if the king admitted his mistake, could it be that they were not in the wrong? Why didn't anyone question the authenticity of Turpan's surrender before? Were they too careless and arrogant? As if reading everyone's thoughts, Yang Chidong handed the telegram to Beta Persei beside him. "Show it to the generals and they'll know what's going on." The telegram contained detailed information and the reason for the attack this time, which was better than Yang Chidong's explanation in 100 sentences. Sure enough, after the generals read it, they all showed a look of realization. Obviously, in their opinion, it was very difficult for a mutiny to happen. And now that it happened, they could only blame their bad luck. Now that everyone knows the reason, let's talk about your opinions. After the telegram was passed around and returned to Yang Chendong's hands, he looked at the generals and asked aloud. After knowing the cause and effect, the generals quickly made a decision in their hearts. Immediately, the 1st Cavalry Division's division commander Tian, who was the first to stand up. Teacher, in my opinion, since their new king has declared war on us, then we don't have to be polite. We'll just send our troops to fight. Our 1st Division is willing to be the vanguard and take down as many as possible to avenge our dead comrades. Tian, who took the initiative to ask for battle, but in the eyes of the other generals, they were unwilling to comply. After Na Raizong reacted, he immediately stood up and said, My king, the ones who were injured are our Mongolian cavalry. Please give this opportunity to take revenge to us. 6th young master, please give the mission to our new army. I promise to take it down in 3 days at the latest. The new army's commander He stood up and said, Give it to our Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division. We can take it down in 2.5 days. Division Commander Dai Kwa also stood up and said, Give it to us. In an instant, all the generals and generals stood up and requested to be the vanguard. They wanted to take down 8 Mile and avenge their dead comrades. What was the morale of an army? This was the morale of an army. When everyone requested to be the vanguard, this kind of morale reached its peak. Once someone was allowed to be the vanguard, they would definitely give 100% of their effort and perform 120% of their best. At this time, if Yang Chendong gave the order, the siege would definitely be twice the result with half the effort. But, however, Yang Chendong still shook his head. Not for anything else, but he was very clear about one thing. This time, he brought all the cavalrymen. If he let the cavalrymen attack the city, not only would the effect be worse, the losses would also be greater. This was not what he wanted to see. However, he couldn't use the cavalrymen. 8 Mile City had to be taken down no matter what. Just based on the fact that the enemy suddenly attacked and killed nearly 1,000 of his cavalrymen, he had to take revenge. Otherwise, how could he face his generals and intimidate the enemy? Beta Persei, when will the 4th Master Lu arrive? Yang Chendong asked Beta Persei, who was beside him. Beta Persei was still thinking about which army the young master would send out when he suddenly heard this question. He was stunned for a moment, but he still instinctively replied, The 4th Master Lu is transporting supplies at the back. They will only arrive at the camp tomorrow morning. Then we will wait for the 4th Master Lu to arrive. This time, I want to let them know what is the meaning of blood for blood. I want to let them know what kind of serious consequences they will face if they dare to set a trap for our 5-star army. Yang Chendong's voice was sonorous and powerful as he spoke. Under normal circumstances, Yang Chendong wouldn't do anything to ordinary people. Even if he didn't like this race very much, once they were conquered by him, they would become his people. There was no problem in protecting them a little. However, this time, Turpan's actions angered him. He decided to use artillery to attack the city tomorrow. When the time came, whether it was soldiers or civilians, they would all be baptized by artillery fire. This method was indeed somewhat heavenly, but these people weren't Han civilians. If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame their new king, Harden Barter. Yang Chendong didn't agree to any of the general's requests. Instead, he wanted to wait for the 4th Master Lu to arrive before starting the battle. This made everyone somewhat dissatisfied, but at the same time, they couldn't say anything. After all, who could compete with the cold vanguard army in a siege battle? Of course, it wasn't that no one had any opinions about this. For example, the commander of the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division, Dai Kwa, was somewhat puzzled. He had joined the Far Eastern Army when it was formed and had always been working under Chen Bo. Because of his exceptional strength and intelligence, he was promoted as an exception. This kind of person was somewhat arrogant. In addition, he didn't know much about the 5-star army, especially the cold vanguard army, which was why he was dissatisfied. However, seeing that no one objected, he thought to himself, Alright, then let's see how this 4th Master Lu performs tomorrow. If they can't do it, I will definitely stand out and fight this battle well. This will also make the Far Eastern Army famous. Yang Chidong didn't know what Dai Ko was thinking. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care too much. He had absolute confidence in the fourth Master Lu. Don't lose 8 Mile City. After a wave of arrows killed nearly 1,000 enemies, the 5-star army retreated. Shirigan's expression didn't relax. Instead, he became even more nervous. He ordered the soldiers to go up the city walls and prepare kerosene, pillows, and boulders. He was waiting for the 5-star army to attack the city. He only had 20,000 soldiers, so he didn't have much confidence. He only hoped that the new king, Hardenbarter, would be able to bring his troops over as soon as possible. On the city walls, all of the Turpan soldiers were waiting. Many of them were so nervous that they were covered in cold sweat. However, in the 5-star army's camp 5 miles away, it was a relaxed scene. The cooks were cooking. Smoke curled up into the air, and the aroma of the meat filled the eyes of many soldiers with satisfaction. Just now, the higher-ups had sent down an order for everyone to rest for a day and prepare to attack tomorrow afternoon. At that time, it wouldn't be easy for everyone to eat in such a relaxed and defenseless place. This was the calm before the storm. Many of the soldiers took this time to rest and prepare themselves for the next battle in their best condition. The 5 astral army suddenly stopped attacking. This was out of Rising Sun Gon's expectations. Even when night fell, there was still no movement from the other side. Finally, he could not help but write a letter and send it back to Tulyafin City to deliver to the new king. Chapter 1204. By the time he received the letter, it was already noon of the second day. It took 2 fast horses to deliver the letter. Hardenbarter, who was wearing the king's robes, nervously opened the letter. What he was most worried about was the 5-star army attacking the city. Daiqin, who was standing beside him, also felt the same way about Hardenbarter's worries. When he saw that the letter was opened and the new king was stunned, he couldn't help but feel even more nervous. He carefully asked, "Your Majesty, did something go wrong?" Hardenbarter didn't reply to General Daiqin's question. He was still stunned. When he was asked a second time, he finally handed the letter over. "General, look at it yourself." Daiqin took the letter with a trace of nervousness. After carefully reading it, he couldn't help but laugh. Good news, good news. King, the 5-star army didn't dare to attack the city after suffering a loss. From this, we can see that they aren't as strong as the rumors say. As long as we can defend the city and wait for our reinforcements to arrive, we can definitely keep them out of the city. This way, our country will be safe. At that time, when the other countries come to help, it will be time for us to fight back with all our strength. Daiqin's idea was indeed correct. Defend the city and not let the 5-star army attack. Then, gather the forces of Ilili, Yirchiang, and Wara's cavalry. They will have hundreds of thousands of soldiers. At that time, their military strength will exceed the enemy's and their supply lines will be much closer. This way, their chances of victory will be much higher. After a bout of laughter, Daiqin noticed that the new king was still frowning. Confused, he asked, "King, this is good news. Why aren't you unhappy?" "Well, I feel that something is wrong. How can the 5-star army, which is able to defeat the great Ming dynasty and even the cavalry of the grassland, who are the best at fighting, be so weak? Do they still have some kind of plan?" Hardenbarter was indeed one of the kings who established Turpan's strength. He was able to see the problem on the spot. However, General Daiqin didn't agree with his idea. "Your Majesty, don't worry. No matter what kind of strategy they have, as long as we don't let them attack and lose 8 li, then they won't be able to use any ability. At that time, the initiative will be in our hands. Won't we be able to do whatever we want? Of course, if your Majesty is worried, I am willing to immediately rush to your aid." Hearing that Daiqin was willing to send reinforcements now, Hardenbarter's face looked much better. "Okay, then I'll have to trouble you. But we only prepared 30,000 soldiers, is that enough?" "That's enough. 30,000 plus the 20,000 defending the city. That's a total of 50,000 soldiers. That's enough to last for 10 days to half a month, or even longer. At that time, the reinforcements from other countries will arrive as well. There won't be a problem, Daichin said confidently. These words gave Hardenbarter a lot of confidence. He nodded happily and said, "All right, then this king will give you the tiger seal. General, don't worry, this king will immediately urge the other countries to send reinforcements. Your Majesty, I will go and prepare now. We will be able to lead the troops out in the afternoon," Daichin said excitedly. However, he didn't know what kind of opponent he was about to face. What he didn't know even more was that right now, Aili was about to face hell on earth. Yesterday, Yang Chidong gave the order that when the 4th Division arrived, they would immediately attack. When the order was given out, Ling Daqiang, who was escorting the supplies at the back, felt like grass had grown in his heart. He couldn't wait to get to Aili's city walls. "Come, call the regimental commanders for a meeting." Ling Daqiang, who couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart, finally couldn't hold it in anymore and called for the 4 regimental commanders. Very quickly, the 1st Regiment Commander Gao Xiang, the 2nd Regiment Commander He Wen, the 3rd Regiment Commander Lu Jing, and the 4th Regiment Commander Yi Xingfeng hurriedly arrived in front of Ling Daqiang. Then, the 4 of them looked at the commander with inquiring eyes. They didn't understand why he called for everyone to gather when they would be able to reach Aili's city walls tomorrow. Ling Daqiang didn't immediately speak. Instead, he looked at the 4 regimental commanders. Seeing that they didn't know what was going on, he couldn't help but laugh. "All right, there's no need to guess anymore. I'll tell you now. This is a good thing." As he spoke, Ling Daqiang took out the telegram he just received. The 4 regimental commanders quickly passed it around and read it clearly. Then, the eyes of the 4 regimental commanders all lit up. The 1st Regiment Commander Gao Xiang said without hesitation, "Our 1st Regiment is the main force. This time, it will definitely be our 1st Regiment's turn to shine. Hey, you can't be like this. Every good thing goes to the 1st Regiment first. Our 2nd Regiment isn't satisfied." The 2nd Regiment Commander He Wen immediately expressed his opposition. Then, the other 2 regimental commanders also expressed their opposition. In the end, the task still fell to Ling Daqiang. Commander Ling Daqiang was very clear that this was an extremely important matter. Everyone wanted to get this mission. It was just that he, as a commander, was in a difficult position as to who to send. In the end, he actually rolled his eyes and used the most primitive method to solve the problem, which was to draw lots. He prepared 4 slips of paper for everyone to draw. 3 of them didn't have anything written on them. Only the last one had the word "attack" written on it. Whoever got the mission would get it. This method was unanimously approved by the 4 regimental commanders. It was fairer to compete with luck. No one could say anything about it. Just like that, after the 4 regimental commanders competed with their luck, the 2nd Regiment Commander He Wen got the slip with the word "attack" written on it. Ha, our 2nd Regiment will be the attack." After opening the slip in his hand, He Wen shouted with joy. The other 3 regimental commanders had dejected expressions. They looked at He Wen with eyes full of envy. "All right, the mission will be given to the 2nd Regiment. But Regiment Commander please remember that your regiment will be escorting 5 100mm mortars at the front of the group. Whether or not you can reach the main camp by noon tomorrow will depend on your ability. If you can't reach on time, the other regimental commanders will be drawing lots. You won't have anything to do. Also, if you don't complete the mission well this time and the landing point is not accurate, the 2nd Regiment won't have anything to do with this kind of mission in the future. Are you willing to accept?" Ling Daqiang continued to raise a series of requests to increase the difficulty of the mission. Yes, I'll accept all of them." "Ha!" the 2nd Regiment Commander He Wen said confidently. Speaking of which, as a member of the Cold Vanguard, it was normal for them to practice with cannons. Although they couldn't practice it as often as they practiced with guns, they would still have missions to fire from time to time. Once they had a target, they would definitely not miss. Just like that, The other 3 regimental commanders sent he went off with envious gazes. The 5 100mm mortars that accompanied the army also left with the 2nd Regiment. In order to complete the mission and complete it efficiently, he rushed all the way. Before noon the next day, he had already arrived 9 miles in the morning. He even took the time to let the soldiers rest for 2 hours and eat some food. Then, he placed the 5 mortars 300 meters in front of 8 Mile City. Yang Chidong had already sent someone to set the measuring stick. Now that the target was right in front of them, he started to order the loading of the mortars in front of the entire army. The feeling of being envied in front of so many people was just too good. Yang Chidong brought all the generals out. Especially the Mongolian army led by Nari Song, they had already put on their armor and were ready to charge. This was also Yang Chidong's compensation for them. Since they had suffered a loss yesterday, of course they had to make up for it today. On top of 8 Mile City, General Shirigan was looking at the scene below with his soldiers. This is the Red Barbarian Cannon. Because it was located in a remote area, the rising sun god had never really come into contact with this thing. However, they had heard that it existed. Now that they saw it in front of the city, they could not help but be shocked. Then, they shouted at their soldiers. "Quick, find a place to hide, quick!" Although he had never seen the power of the cannon, he believed that since the 5-star army had waited for so long, they would not hesitate when they attacked. Under Shirigan's shouts, the soldiers of Turkmenistan quickly found a place to hide. However, because they did not have enough knowledge, most of the soldiers only hid under the battlements. In his opinion, with the city walls as a defense, it was already safe enough. Regarding the reaction of the people on top of the city, Commander Hewan acted as if he did not hear anything. At this moment, he was still meticulously completing his actions. He ordered his men to adjust the measuring stick and make the necessary preparations. The cannon was being prepared in an orderly manner. Commander Hewan acted as if he did not hear the reaction of the Turkmenistan soldiers below the city gates. This was because he knew that once the cannons were fired, it would be difficult to say where he would be safe. Therefore, whether he hid or not, or where he hid, would be the same. The 5-star army was waiting in formation, especially the Mongolian cavalry led by Nari Song. Although Yang Chidong had said that they could only attack after half an hour of bombardment, he was still fully prepared. The sun hung high in the sky, and from time to time, a cold wind would blow, but at this moment, many people no longer felt anything. Everyone's attention was focused on the 5 pitch-black iron blocks at the front. They were waiting to see how powerful they would be next. Among the cavalry, it was not that no one had seen the power of cannons before. However, most of them had only seen cannons firing 1 round at a time. Not many of them had seen 5 cannons firing at the same time. The result was not something they could imagine. Everything that was about to happen next made them not even want to blink. They were afraid that they would miss something. Finally, under everyone's anticipation and complicated thoughts, the 5 100mm mortars were ready. The cannons were also loaded. They only needed to wait for the final order to fire 5 rounds. Chapter 12:05. Hewan didn't immediately give the order because this was the first time he had to deal with something like this. Although Yang Xia was powerful, his ability to rely on cannonballs was still very weak. The process wasn't up to standard, so out of 10 cannonballs, only 1 or 2 could actually be used. This made them have no choice but to use them sparingly. This was also the reason why cannons weren't widely used until now. It was because the technology wasn't mature enough. Everything depended on a large probability and hard work. It was because of the preciousness of cannonballs that Hewan couldn't help but turn around to look at Yang Chidong. He was waiting for the 6th young master to give the final order. He didn't say anything and only nodded his head, representing Yang Chidong's attitude. Normally, a city with only 50,000 people and 20,000 soldiers didn't need to be so big. However, the shameless sneak attack yesterday made Yang Chidong unhappy. Even if he had to waste some cannonballs, he wanted to make the enemy pay the price. He wanted to tell the world what the consequences of messing with the 5-star army were. After receiving the final order, Wen's eyes flashed with excitement. He quickly turned around and shouted with a red flag in his hand. "Cannoneers, prepare to fire! Fire!" Wen shouted with all his strength, causing the veins on his neck to pop out. Along with this shout, boom, 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 boom! The 5 cannons roared at the same time, and a beam of fire shot out from the barrel. With a speed that couldn't be followed by the naked eye, it flew towards 8 Mile City, which was 300 meters away. Under the rumbling sound, it attracted the neighs of war horses. Boom, 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 boom! The cannons rumbled, and the 100mm mortars showed their ferocious side, mercilessly attacking the target. They hadn't seen the cannons of the future explode all over the mountain and raze it to the ground. This made the people at that time look like ignorant children. Occasionally, they would see a grenade explode, and they would exclaim in surprise. In the eyes of such people, the power of the 100mm mortar was as terrifying as the nuclear bomb tests of the later generations. This was especially so when the mortar landed below the city wall and instantly blasted a large hole in it. Many people were dumbfounded and revealed looks of disbelief. There were also countless people who kept rubbing their eyes at that moment. They wanted to make sure that what they were seeing was real, or that they had been traveling in a dream. Compared to the shock and doubt of these people, the Turpan soldiers and civilians who were the ones being attacked felt the reality of the situation. When the cannonballs whizzed over their heads or exploded beside them, cries and curses could be heard all over the place. Houses collapsed in an instant, stones flew everywhere, shops burned, and severed limbs suddenly appeared on the streets. When fresh and bloody flesh was thrown everywhere, it was like hell on earth. In the next second, no one knew where the cannonball would land. It was like the sword of Damocles hanging over everyone's head, making them feel nothing but fear. No one knew what would happen in the next second. No one knew if they would still be alive in the next second. In the next second, would he become the target of the explosion and be blown into pieces? The morale of the soldiers and the people began to collapse at that moment. The inside of the city was like hell on earth. Every breath seemed to pass by very slowly. Outside the city, many soldiers of the 5-star army were dumbfounded. Among them were some company commanders, battalion commanders, regiment commanders, and even division commanders. Many of them knew that cannons were very powerful, especially the 5-star army's cannons. They had tried their best to overestimate the power of the cannons, but they could not help but be amazed. The reality was more spectacular and powerful than they had imagined. It could only be said that their imaginations still needed to be improved and increased. Because of that, many people were secretly sizing up Wen's 2nd Regiment, who was still firing the cannons. Many people were also amazed by Bugnam of Gojoseon's strength and power. This was because he was the one who had invented and created these things under his guidance. Fire! Wen was still waving the little red flag. At that moment, he had entered a half-crazy state. Every time he fired a cannon, his face would turn red. He was immersed in this moment. Enough. Yang Chudong looked at the watch on his wrist. He looked at Beta Persei next to him, and said softly. This voice also awakened Beta Persei, who was also in shock. Although he was Yang Chudong's guard, it was rare to see a scene like this. Yes. Beta Persei responded, and quickly rode to Wen's side. He said loudly. Young Master's order is to stop firing. Stop loading cannons. Wen quickly reacted and shouted. Then, he had a distressed look on his face. Looking at the empty cannonball boxes, he wanted to cry but had no tears. This time, they had fired more than 10 cannonballs than planned. These were the treasures of the 4th Division. He really didn't know how the division commander would deal with him if he saw them. The rumbling of the cannonballs finally stopped. Narasatsu, who was half a beat slower, finally reacted. When he looked around, he found that the city gate that was 8 miles away had already flown away. There was not even a shadow of the enemy in sight. He could not help but laugh and then shouted, Mongolian cavalry, listen to my order. Follow me and kill! After the word kill was spoken, the scimitar was unsheathed. Then, The sound of horse hooves shook the sky. Take advantage of the situation. The Mongolian cavalry's complicated situation had arrived. No one would have thought that just yesterday, the Mongolian cavaliers would be caught off guard and killed by the Mongolian cavaliers. It had only been a day, and their chance for revenge had presented itself. Facing an opponent who also had no ability to resist, they began a massacre that was unique to them. They had long been ordered to attack without mercy. This time, the Mongolian cavalry only faced 20,000 Turpan soldiers who were defending the city. There were also civilians who wanted to resist with sticks and even pots and pans. In short, there was no right or wrong in war, because everything was wrong. Enemies were not absolute either. Those who had weapons were enemies. Nearly 20,000 Mongolian cavaliers charged into the city like ferocious beasts, causing the city that was already covered in blood to become even dimmer. This day was destined to be a day in hell for the soldiers and civilians who were 8 miles away from the city. Yang Chidong rode on his horse as if he did not hear all of this. It was not that his heart was as hard as stone, but he knew very well that evil people needed to be dealt with by evil people. Perhaps some people would understand that if you respected them, they would return the favor tenfold. But to some people, if you back down, you would only be seen as a sign of weakness. To such people, only by killing them could one completely subdue them mentally and physically, such that they would never dare to have any thoughts of resistance. Naturally, this was a way to treat the symptoms, but not the root of the problem. But it did not matter. Yang Chinong still had a backup plan, which was to move the civilians away. When a place was filled with strangers, their so-called national spirit would naturally crumble. If they could live a good life, then no one would rebel. A war that could not be considered a war that was just a massacre, finally ended after the Mongolian cavalry vented their anger. After the battle, out of the 20,000 Turpan soldiers, over 8,000 were killed, and the captives were all injured. Out of the 50,000 civilians, over 5,000 died, and many were injured. This was the result of playing tricks with the 5-star army. Maybe if they did not play tricks and fought head-on, they would not have suffered such heavy losses. What was worth mentioning was that the defending general, Shirigan, had died under a giant rock. One could deduce that a cannonball had blown up the battlements, and unfortunately, it landed on his body. A Turpan heavy general actually died just like that on the ground. It was as his name implied, storm, he died in a storm. Your Majesty, your subordinate is untalented. About 200 cavalrymen escaped, and we were unable to catch up. Na Raizong appeared in front of Yang Chindong, his body reeking of blood. No worries, someone needs to report. Yang Chindong did not care about this at all. He even felt that the number of people who escaped was too little. In his eyes, those soldiers who had seen such a scene would not be able to fight against the 5-star army. The shadow in their hearts was their greatest enemy. 8 Mile City, which was seen as a natural stronghold, was lost just like that. From the start of the attack to the complete occupation, it took less than 4 hours. When the 200 cavalry that escaped scattered, and a portion of them returned to Turpan City, it was already the night of the second day. The new king, Hardenbarter, was woken up from the palace, and he learned about what had happened from the general on duty. What? 8 Mile City was lost, the 20,000 troops were wiped out, and Shirigan general died in battle. After hearing the report from the general on duty, Hardenbarter fell back into his throne, his eyes devoid of light. How could this be? How could this be? After a long while, Hardenbarter finally sobered up, but he still couldn't stop himself from blurting out this sentence. King, I heard from the soldiers that escaped that the 5-star army used a powerful cannon that turned the entire 8 Mile City into hell. When the general on duty said this, his whole body trembled. He couldn't help but think that if this was true, then how could they use swords and spears to fight against the cannons? What was the difference between this and throwing away their lives? Cannons? Powerful cannons? How is this possible? This king has also heard of the great Ming's Divine Machine Battalion, but it was not that powerful. Hardenbarter asked in disbelief. Chapter 1206. But the soldiers who escaped all said so. "My king, how should we deal with these people?" the general on duty asked carefully. Because he was a general, he knew that if this matter was spread out, it would affect the morale of the army. He was afraid that no one would dare to fight against the 5-star army. "How should we deal with them?" "Lock them all up. If anyone dares to say anything, behead them on the spot." Hardenbarter was indeed an ambitious person. He quickly thought of the crux of the matter and revealed a ferocious look to the general on duty. "Understood, my king." The general on duty nodded and went out to handle the matter. In fact, he wanted to say that it wasn't just these people who escaped. There were also some soldiers who ran away who didn't know where. He was afraid that the news couldn't be hidden. However, he didn't dare to say anything because he was afraid of Hardenbarter's gaze. He was afraid that his king would let him handle this matter. Wouldn't that be asking for trouble? The general on duty was right. At this time, the news couldn't be hidden anymore. This was because the soldiers who escaped were already terrified. When they escaped, some of them randomly chose a direction and ended up in different cities. This news spread along with these people. However, this wasn't the most depressing thing. What really made the Turpan kingdom unable to bear was General Daichin, who had already led 30,000 troops to battle. While he was on his way to the city of Bali with 5,000 cavalry and 25,000 infantry, they met with the new army of the Third Army, which was marching towards Turpan. When the scouts from both sides met, there was naturally a bloody battle. Then, the news spread back to each side. Suhi was leading the new army of 20,000 people on the road when he suddenly heard the scouts say that there was a foreign race army ahead. There were about 30,000 of them, and most of them were infantry. This news made Suhi's body shake and he was very excited. Since leaving the Liaodong region, Suhi and the new army had been hurrying along. They didn't even fight a decent battle. Even when they were outside the beginning city, they were merely chasing after the enemy. This made him feel stifled. Yang Chidong trusted him so much that he brought him wherever he went, but his contribution was too small. Just as he was vexed and thinking about how to achieve great things in Turpan, the opportunity finally came. "Inform all divisions to launch a fierce attack in company units." The two armies had suddenly met, and there was no time to prepare a battle plan. However, Suhi trusted his officers. He believed that they would not fail their mission and inflict heavy losses on the enemy. Although such an encounter came very suddenly, the new three armies had already undergone the corresponding training. At this moment, it was the time for them to display their subjective initiative. What mattered was which officer reacted faster, and the rewards would naturally be greater. He had been by Yang Chinong's side for many years and had fought with his opponents for a long time. He had seen all kinds of situations and had made all kinds of preparations. None of this was a problem. The new army had such confidence. But in comparison, Daichin didn't have such ability. This didn't mean that Daichin's commanding ability wasn't good, but that the reaction of his soldiers was much worse. When the scouts at the front sent news that they suddenly met the 5-star army 10 miles ahead, Daichin's first reaction was that it was impossible. It could be said that he was unlucky. Because he was traveling on the official road, he didn't encounter a single deserter who was scared out of their wits. Naturally, he didn't believe that there would be a large number of 5-star army in the hinterland of Turpan. 8 Mile City was guarded by the Rising Sun Gon and 20,000 elites, so it couldn't be broken through so easily. It must be a small group of the 5-star army that charged in from who knows where. This was Daichin's first reaction. But out of caution, he ordered the army to stop moving forward. He would personally bring 5,000 cavalry to see what was going on. In Daichin's mind, the 5-star army wouldn't have too many people. With him leading 5,000 cavalry, it would be enough. Even if they really encountered a large number of enemy troops, he would still have the chance to retreat and form a defensive line. At that time, as long as he could hold the enemy here and then ask for reinforcements from the king, he could even launch a pincer attack with the Rising Sun Gon general. This would deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army and make a great contribution. To be able to think of such a plan in such a short time, Daiqin could be considered a qualified general. But he neglected two important points. First, the so-called pincer attack only had one side left. This meant that this plan wouldn't work. Second, not only were his opponents strong, his 30,000 troops couldn't compare to them. It had been more than 10 years, and the Turpan kingdom had not had any wars with the outside world. Their army had been living too comfortably. Although the training had been carried out before, when they encountered one of the elites under Yang Chenong's command, the new Third Army, it was naturally not enough. Not many people could predict the outcome of a battle before it even started, much less when General Daiqin was still so confident. He brought 5,000 cavalry and charged out first. They were ferocious, like a dragon coming out of the sea. Under the envious gazes of the 20,000 infantry, the 5,000 cavalry charged out. Half of the 30,000 Turpan soldiers were new soldiers that joined in recent years. A complete conscription system was one of the most important military reforms in Turpan. In history, it was because they were one step ahead of other countries that the strength of their army was maintained at a very high level. The soldiers were old and needed to be replaced, or they were injured and were not suitable for prolonged battles. Furthermore, the country valued the soldiers and the corresponding policies improved, so the status of soldiers in the Turpan kingdom was not low. Because of this, many young people were attracted to join the army. More than half of the soldiers were young people who yearned for glory. It was said that a soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier. These people came because of this. The way to fulfill this wish was to enter the battlefield and kill the enemy. This was an advanced method of replacing soldiers. Even now, Yang Chenong didn't dare to try it. This was all because his goal was too big. He needed more experienced soldiers. If he eliminated all of them, he wouldn't have the time to train more new soldiers to fight and win. Turpan did it. One had to admit that they were very bold. However, this also had a fatal flaw. A soldier who had never seen blood would forever be a new recruit. They would not be able to understand the cruelty of the battlefield, nor would they understand how important it was to maintain a balanced mentality in this life-and-death situation. And now, it was time for the 5-star army to teach them a lesson. When the 5,000 cavalrymen walked past the new recruits with envy, they suddenly retreated. Just like when they left, the 5,000 cavalry were still 5,000 cavalry. But the difference was that they didn't have the high spirits from before. Instead, they were in a sorry state. If one had to use an idiom to describe it, it would be that they were like birds startled by the twang of a bow. Among them, the one who ran the fastest was the role model of many of the new soldiers, General Daiqin. Daiqin was originally full of confidence, but not long after he charged out, he saw the 5-star army cavalry covering the sky and earth. Especially when the enemy used companies as a unit, and each company had a bright 5-star flag. At that moment, it was as if the entire sky was dyed red. Daiqin's pride instantly disappeared, and what replaced it was fear, and finally, he turned around and left. On such a battlefield, he could no longer analyze how many enemies there were. However, he knew that if he really led 5,000 cavalrymen into battle, it would be equivalent to sending lambs into a tiger's den. In the end, not a single one of them would be able to escape. How is this possible? There are so many enemies. What is Shirigan doing? Why didn't he report it? Why? As he retreated, he kept cursing Shirigan. Completely unprepared, Daiqin was caught off guard. Facing the powerful new army, his confidence was gone. All he could think of was to retreat. To put it bluntly, it was to escape. One soldier was fearful, while the general was fearful. When the main commander had his fear embedded in his bones, it was easy to imagine how this battle would continue. There was no hope of winning this battle. The 5,000 cavalry returning so quickly gave the 25,000 infantry a lot of confusion. Some of the old soldiers who had participated in the war had a bad look on their faces. Experience seemed to have told them the answer. But for the new soldiers who were participating in the war for the first time, they couldn't understand. Some even naively thought, was this General Daiqin's way of training the soldiers? Was it to test how fast the cavalry was? No matter what kind of thoughts these people had, the truth would tell everyone what had happened. Just as the 5,000 cavalry returned to the infantry camp, behind them, an eye-catching red flag appeared. Then, 10,000 horses galloped, as if Mount Tai was pressing down on them. At first, there was only one flag, then a few flags. But then, more and more red flags appeared. It was as if they suddenly grew in the sky, giving people a feeling that there was no end to them. And these red flags only came from one direction, the direction of the 30,000 Tulu army. Prepare to fight. Set up the formation. Archers, spearmen, step forward. Finally returning to the side of his own army, Dai Qin, whose expression was still uncertain, started to shout out orders. Even though he was frightened by the enemy's formation, but as a general, his responsibility was to command the battle. Even though he knew that the chances of victory were slim, he still had to do it. This was his mission. Chapter 1207. Dai Qin was already standing at the position he was supposed to be standing at, and the order had already been read out by him. If it was during training, with his shout, the soldiers below would definitely obey in unison. The archers and pikemen would definitely have rushed to the front, and behind them, the piaolins and short-bladed soldiers would have started to raise stakes and set up tripping ropes and other things. It could be said that the Turkopan kingdom had put in a lot of effort in training to deal with cavalry. This caused their confidence to swell, and they dared to face any opponent or provocation. However, training was still training. They didn't even know what a drill was. When they were actually on the battlefield, these things suddenly became so useless. When they saw the enemy cavalry approaching from all directions, when they felt the earth tremble at this moment, when they felt the breeze that blew against their faces, when they felt a wave of austere air, when they felt a wave of murderous intent, the minds of the recruits were completely blank. At this moment, they couldn't remember what military order, what training program, and even where they were supposed to stand. Everyone could only stare blankly in front of them. The enemy is here, what are you waiting for? Cavalry, release the arrows. Dai Qin noticed this scene and felt a chill in his heart. They had never been to a war before, but when the real war came, they were afraid of the enemy. Seeing that the 5-star army was getting closer and closer, they didn't have much time left. Dai Qin roared and gave the order to the cavalry beside him to shoot. He wanted to use blood to tell these recruits that they were on the battlefield, and not training. If they didn't pay attention, then the only thing that awaited them was death. The 5,000 cavalry made up of all veterans looked much better than the recruits. When they heard General Dai Qin's order, although they couldn't bear it, they were after all their comrades, their countrymen. However, military orders were like mountains, and they couldn't afford to hesitate or slack off. Arrows were nocked and arrows were prepared. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. One after another, iron-tipped bows and arrows flew through the air, shooting toward the very front of their own troops, where the archers and spearmen were supposed to be in formation and ready to defend against the enemy. Swoosh, 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 the arrows all fell, hitting the backs of the unprepared and stunned soldiers. In just one wave of attacks, at least hundreds of people were killed or injured. Fresh blood assailed their nostrils. When death was right in front of them, some of the recruits were so scared that their footsteps became unsteady. They didn't know where to go. However, even more soldiers were awakened by the shock. Their thoughts finally returned to reality, and they already knew that they had to pick up their weapons and prepare for battle. Being forced to do so was also a very correct way to deal with it. Instead of seeing blood, one would be afraid of blood. The moment one saw blood, it was easier to arouse the heroic spirit and fighting spirit in one's heart. One had to admit that Dai Qin had made the right bet. At the very least, under his orders, at the cost of losing several hundred people, the enthusiasm of the vanguard army was aroused. They finally knew their duty and what they should do next to avoid more deaths and more bloodshed. 3 miles away, the vanguard of the 5-star army had already entered. The new 3 armies formed by the elites of the various Mongolian races were coming over with an imposing aura. They spurred their horses forward, and as they charged, they held their bows in their hands. Shining arrows were pulled out from their quivers, and they were prepared to shoot from afar. For an army that had just come back from the battlefield of one nation and had made many contributions, they knew how to perform on the battlefield in order to kill the enemy as much as possible and protect themselves as best as possible. Some tactical actions were like blood was thicker than water, and they had become a habit. Just like right now, they were bending over their horses, minimizing their own targets to ensure that when the enemy's arrows came, the possibility of hitting them would be minimized. The moment they looked ahead with bright eyes, they were like a pack of wolves on the grassland, locking onto their prey. This instinct, along with the countless brushes with death, made many of them instinctively feel the threat of death. What kind of enemy could pose a threat to them, and what kind of arrows could hit their positions? When they looked over, they already had a general understanding in their hearts. Therefore, when they saw the performance of the Turpan soldiers, the threat they felt wasn't strong, and could even be said to be weak. The enemy's strength isn't strong, and their morale is low. Take this chance, charge! A company commander at the front, after making a judgment based on his intuition, gave the order to his 100 soldiers. There were many other company commanders like this. Most of them crawled out from piles of corpses. Maybe they couldn't read much, and couldn't speak much, but one had to admit that they had a lot of experience in commanding on the battlefield. A tiger leading a pack of wolves to fight a wolf leading a pack of sheep, this result seemed to have been decided a long time ago. There was a saying in the world about the food chain. What you eat is predetermined a long time ago. Even if there were some miracles, it didn't mean that this principle would be easily changed. Just like now, the 30,000 Turpan soldiers led by Daichin couldn't create any miracles. Release the arrows. When the distance between the two sides was less than 200 meters, General Daichin on the horse let out an angry roar. Technically, they weren't completely within the range of the arrows, but Daichin still gave the order. He was afraid that if the distance was too close, the archers would show their cowardly side again. After the order was given, the 5,000 archers didn't hesitate to release the arrows in their hands. The results of their training finally showed. At least after the order was given, they could execute it. This was already not an easy thing to do. As for the reaction of the soldiers, if General Daichin had to give it a score, he would give it at least 70 points. 5,000 arrows were shot from afar, towards the 5-star Army's vanguard cavalry. Under the rain of arrows, there seemed to be no place that was safe. Facing the attack of the arrows, the new Army's cavalry showed their rich battle experience. Just like in modern warfare, there were veterans who could accurately predict where the bullets would land and where the cannonballs would land. Many of the cavalry soldiers made all kinds of dodging actions. Some leaned their bodies to the side of their horses, some pulled their horses to the side, some waved their cavalry swords in front of them, and some jumped off their horses and rolled to the ground. No matter what kind of dodging action, it was all based on their position. If they could dodge, they would dodge. If they couldn't dodge, they would block. If they couldn't block, they would abandon their horses. The 5-star Army's military rules had one requirement in this area. How to protect oneself to the greatest extent under the rain of arrows was the most important. As for whether the posture was the same, whether it looked good or not, no one paid attention to it. Under all kinds of dodging actions, the 5,000 arrows only caused a few hundred horses to be shot, and a few hundred soldiers to be injured or killed. Among them, the number of injured soldiers was far greater than the number of dead soldiers. This naturally had to do with the rich battle experience of the new Army's cavalry, but at the same time, it also had to do with the fact that the Turpan Army had fired their arrows too early. Most of the arrows weren't in range, so they didn't threaten the safety of the new Army's cavalry. Reflect. After the first wave of arrows, the new Army's cavalry began their counterattack. It was impolite not to reciprocate. Under the speed of the war horses, the distance of a few hundred meters was covered in a flash. Right now, the distance between the two sides was less than 100 meters, which was the optimal range for the arrows. The new Army's cavalry began their counterattack. Unlike the blind arrows of the Turfan archers, the arrows of the 5-star Army cavalry were very methodical. Based on the positions they occupied, they would choose the opponents closest to them to ensure that each arrow would only target one person, and there would be no duplicates. As such, the vanguard consisted of 6,000 to 7,000 cavalrymen, and the damage dealt by the arrows was on a completely different level from the Turpan archers. When the first wave of arrows landed on the ground, over 1,000 Turpan archers were knocked down to the ground. And all of this was just the beginning. After the first wave of arrows, they didn't need to wait for the previous arrow to hit the enemy. This was an instinct of the 5-star Army's cavalrymen. They weren't like the Turpan archers, who still needed to wait for the result after firing an arrow. Then, they would nervously grab their quiver and reload the arrows. This created a situation where the speed of the arrows was completely different. Over 1,000 Turpan archers were knocked to the ground, which greatly disrupted the speed of their arrows. In addition, they were already nervous to begin with, so the speed at which they took out their arrows was much slower than before. As a result, when the second wave of arrows was released, both sides were actually at the same frequency. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, whoosh whoosh whoosh. The scene of arrows clashing appeared. Both sides released thousands of arrows at the same time, rushing towards the opposite side. As a result, some of the arrows actually collided with each other in midair, producing a series of crackling sounds of iron weapons colliding with each other. Then, another large group of Turpan archers were knocked to the ground. Previously, they didn't even have the advantage when they attacked first, let alone when they were shooting at the same time. In the eyes of many Turpan archers, they already had no target. All they could do was instinctively shoot. If they couldn't even see the target's position, how could they talk about accuracy? Archers, back off. Spearmen, get ready. General Daichin's heart ached as he looked at this scene. The performance of his own archers was not as good as he expected. Coincidentally, the performance of the enemy's archers was so good. He knew that if they continued to shoot arrows, his losses would only be greater. Now, he placed his bet on the second group of spearmen. He noticed that after a short period of confusion, these spearmen were gradually getting into the right state of mind. Chapter 1208. The archers began to retreat, while the spearmen began to advance. Their shining spears were like a spear formation, waiting for the cavalry of the 5-star army to charge over and pierce through them, giving them a 10,000 spears piercing the heart. The performance of the spearmen was seen by General Daichin, and he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Luckily, his training wasn't in vain. After a short period of chaos, they started to get into their roles. Now it was time to deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army. Although it wouldn't be a sure win, it would at least result in a heavy blow. Next would be the final battle between the two sides. The outcome of the battle would be 50-50. Daichin's expression started to return to normal. He wanted to see how the 5-star army would deal with his spear formation. It must be known that even if he brought 5,000 cavalry to charge in, he wouldn't be able to gain any advantage. An inch long, an inch strong. The cavalry wouldn't be able to charge in, and would have to face the sharp spears. They would die without a doubt. It's the spearmen! Surround them! Daichin's face was filled with anticipation. The new army's cavalry also discovered the enemy's formation. Then, the company commanders who were in charge of commanding the troops showed disdainful expressions. That's right. Once a war horse came into contact with a spear, the consequences would be unimaginable. It would be like a lion plunging straight into a well full of thorns. This was also the reason why many armies were used to using spearmen to deal with cavalry. But the new army's cavalry weren't lions. They were humans with intelligence. Seeing that the pikemen had already formed their formation and charging forward would be suicidal, why didn't they circle around them? As the company commanders gave the order to surround the pikemen, the cavalry of the new Third Army suddenly split up from the middle, moving towards the two sides of the Turban infantry that were waiting for them in formation. What? The 5-star Army's cavalry's response was seen by Daichin. His eyes couldn't help but widen. It must be said that surrounding the enemy wasn't a profound battle tactic. The ancient battle formations were mysterious, and could be used in any battle. However, when the 5-star army was less than 30 meters away from the spear formation, they were still able to change their formation in such an orderly manner. This was not an easy thing to do. The greatest advantage of a cavalry charge was speed. Under extreme speed, the strength of the saber would often be amplified by several times or even 10 times. For example, when the cavalry charged, each swing of their sabers carried a force of a few hundred jin. This was something that could only be achieved when the man and the horse were one. This resulted in many scenes where the heads of the infantrymen would fly to the sky after the cavalry swung their sabers. It was precisely because the speed was too fast that it created a huge flaw, which was that it couldn't change directions at will. At least, it couldn't change directions as freely as it could with 2 legs. It was precisely because of this that Daichin decided to use the pike soldier when the distance between the 2 sides was relatively close. This was to catch the opponent off guard and prevent the opponent from being able to change his direction in time. With 6,000 archers in front, they were densely packed and blocked the vision of the 5-star army's cavalry. This increased the concealment of the pike soldier. Suddenly using the pike soldier would increase the chances of dealing a fatal blow to the enemy. But now, the 5-star army's cavalry actually changed their direction so easily. It looked like they were doing it so skillfully. How could General Daichin not be shocked? This was the first time the enemy was fighting on the battlefield. Everyone wasn't very clear about the enemy's attacking methods. This made it easier for them to use their trump cards. But looking at the 5-star army, it was as if they already knew about the pike soldiers' ambush. What was going on? On this point, one couldn't help but say that Daichin's vision was limited. He thought that he was able to lead his troops well. First the archers, then the pike soldiers' sudden appearance would definitely catch the enemy off guard. But what he didn't know was that this tactic had been used by the Japanese army for a long time. As a new army that had fought against the Japanese army and won, they were already used to this tactic. Right now, the Turpan army was just following in the footsteps of the Japanese army. There really wasn't anything new to speak of. But to the Turpan army that hadn't fought in a war for many years, under this kind of speed, the cavalry could still change their direction. This was too shocking. And if Daichin knew that Yang Chindong had given a strict order that the cavalry could only display their full speed when attacking the enemy. Under other circumstances, they couldn't maintain their full speed and had to be prepared to change their direction at any time, then he wouldn't be so shocked. As mentioned before, the new army's composition was mostly made up of the warriors of the grassland tribes. A large portion of them were cavalry warriors that had fought with Tuacho Buhuacan before. For such experts, changing direction at a distance of 30 meters wasn't difficult at all. Even if it wasn't as easy as eating and drinking, it wasn't much different. The vanguard cavalry of the new army changed their direction and surrounded the Turpan army from both sides. While they were half surrounding the Turpan army, the bows in their hands weren't idle. They shot towards the Turpan army from both sides. The Turpan army's archers had already retreated and returned to their formation. It was impossible to counterattack in a short period of time. This allowed the new army's cavalry to focus on their targets without worrying about being reflected back. Arrows flew through the air, occasionally taking the lives of the Turpan army's soldiers. Among them, most of the soldiers were short-bladed soldiers. Piao Dao soldiers split into 2 sides and protect the formation. Seeing the soldiers being easily killed by the 5-star army's cavalry, General Daichin's heart was bleeding. He had no choice but to change the formation again. After the order was given, the short-bladed soldiers outside the formation started to move inwards. The Piao Dao soldiers inside the formation started to move outwards. There was a bit of chaos in between the 2 sides. Luckily, there were lessons like this during training, so they didn't lose their composure immediately. As the Piao Dao soldiers walked out of the formation, the arrows of the 5-star army's cavalry became powerless. Most of the arrows were blocked by the shields. Once the situation stabilized, General Daichin let out a sigh of relief. At the same time, he gave another order for the archers to walk out of the formation. He was going to start the counterattack. Infantry had a natural disadvantage against cavalry. On this point, Daichin had his own understanding. Thus, he didn't feel much pain when he lost 1,000 men. He also believed that once the archers reached the outside and started the counterattack, they would be able to turn the situation around. After all, the 5-star Army's vanguard cavalry only had 6,000 to 7,000 men. He had 30,000 troops in his hands. Fuck, if you want to counterattack, I'll give you the chance. My men, follow me and charge. A company commander on the left side of the Turfan army noticed the change in the enemy's formation. He cursed and led his men, who were still alive, to charge. The ones on the outside were only Piao Dao's soldiers. According to the saying, they had a natural disadvantage against cavalry and were completely countered. When faced with the sudden charge of the cavalry, even though there were only a company of 100 men, they still managed to carve out a huge gap, killing over 100 Piao soldiers. This caused the formation of the Turfan army to change again and again, becoming even more chaotic. With an example, the other company commanders realized that this charge was very effective. They all followed suit. More and more companies joined the charge. In a moment, the Turfan army that seemed to have a tight defense started to fall into chaos. What was worse was that before the battle, General Su He had said that the divisions, regiments, and battalions could attack on their own. This meant that all the initiative was handed over to the company commander of the first company. In this way, some companies launched a charge, while some companies continued to launch long-range attacks with their bows and arrows. Such a completely uncoordinated attack made General Daiqin feel a sense of helplessness. If the Piao Dao soldiers retreated, they would face the arrows. If they didn't retreat, they would face the charge of the 5-star army. No matter how he looked at it, it wouldn't solve the problem. In just this moment of hesitation, many of the 5-star army cavalry had already charged into the Turfan army and started a crazy massacre. Some of the Piao Dao soldiers, and archers became their main targets. This also made Daiqin's plan to counterattack fail. It was also at this moment that more and more of the new army cavalry came from afar. They were preparing to join the attack formation. Seeing that their advantage in numbers was about to disappear, General Daiqin sighed and quickly brought his 5,000 cavalry to leave the army and run towards the back. This move was very timely. Because if it was 15 minutes later, the new army cavalry would have surrounded them from both sides. At that time, even if Daiqin could charge out, he would have lost at least half of his 5,000 cavalry, or even more. With General Daiqin's escape, the already chaotic formation instantly collapsed. Without a unified command, the general didn't know the soldiers, and the soldiers didn't know the general. Adding on the appearance of the new army cavalry, it was like the last straw on the camel's back. In an instant, the infantry formation completely collapsed. The new army cavalry used this chance to charge into the formation, raising their sabers to kill while shouting the slogan of surrendering to avoid death. No one wanted to die, especially when they knew that they were losing. More and more Turfan soldiers knelt on the ground and threw down the weapons in their hands. The battle was over. Out of the 25,000 Turfan infantry, around 5,000 died or were injured. The remaining 20,000 all surrendered. Not a single one escaped. The new army only paid the price of around 1,000 cavalry killed or injured. This great victory made Commander Su He overjoyed, and at the same time, he rewarded the company commander who was the first to launch the attack on the spot. At the same time, this victory was also reported to King Wu Nan, Yang Chidong, who was coming from behind by telegram. Chapter 1209. Good, the first battle was a great victory. Looking at the contents of the telegram, Yang Chidong was in a good mood and laughed loudly. Logically speaking, the first battle was to take down the 8-mile gap. In that battle, they had taken down the eastern gate of the Tulyafan kingdom with almost 0 losses. But in Yang Chidong's eyes, all of this was due to the artillery. Anyone with such a powerful weapon could achieve such an effect. On the contrary, the new army's first battle, killing 5,000 enemies and capturing 20,000 prisoners, this was the real victory on the battlefield. Announce the contents to the entire army and commend Commander Su He, Yang Chidong said with a laugh as he returned the telegram to Wang Shan. Yes. Wang Shan replied, then turned and left. Beta Persei frowned and asked carefully and worriedly, Young master, won't such a commendation cause dissatisfaction among the other commanders? It's not good for unity. Ha! Yang Chidong waved his hand and said, Winning the battle and making great contributions should be rewarded. It's to let the entire army know and put pressure on the other commanders. All of this was intentional by Yang Chidong. He wanted to let the new army win the battle and stimulate the other commanders so that they would also rush to make contributions. Only in this way could he solve the problem in Yilabali as quickly as possible. In Yang Chidong's plan, Yilabali was just one of the tens of thousands of places to be conquered. He couldn't waste too much time in such a place. What he needed to do was to sweep everything with the power of thunder. This not only required his own efforts, but also the joint efforts of the other commanders. Delegating power was what Yang Chidong had to do to achieve his goal. If everything was under his command, he could win one battle, win two battles. But if power was handed over to the commanders, and commanders, then small victories would accumulate to great victories, and finally complete the victory in the shortest time and extent. This was what he wanted to see. The telegram was sent very quickly and spread throughout the army in the shortest amount of time. When the telegram was delivered to Major General Tian Hu of the 1st Cavalry Division, a look of surprise flashed across his face. Then, he held the telegram tightly in his hand. Men, inform the 4 commanders to quickly come for a meeting. Tian Hu's voice carried a hint of urgency. Several messengers immediately dispersed in all directions. Merely 2 hours later, the 5th Regiment commander, Gong Feng, who was the furthest away from the center of the army, also rushed over. At this point, the 5 regiment commanders had all gathered. While the 5 regiment commanders were still puzzled, Tian Hu had already taken out the telegram that was full of wrinkles. After the 5 captains looked through them one by one, their expressions were extremely solemn. This time, the new army snatched the first prize, which was completely out of their expectations. According to Yang Chidong's military plan, the new army was going to attack the capital of Turpan. It was definitely going to be a tough nut to crack. Unless the 4th Division, who was in charge of logistics, arrived, who knew how much effort it would take to conquer it. But now, their luck was so good that they actually ran into the Turpan reinforcements and snatched a huge victory. This caused the 1st Cavalry Division, which originally wanted to take down Hobak Seri, near Kramer City, to fall behind by a step. By taking Hobak Seri, they had cut off the retreat of Ili to the north. This was very important. Yang Chidong didn't just want this huge piece of land. He wanted to eliminate all the opposing forces in this area and achieve complete peace. It was because of the importance of this mission that the 1st Cavalry Division was able to win over the strongest cavalry force. But now, Hobak was still 100 li away, and the new army had already sent back news of victory. It was no wonder that everyone was unhappy. This is luck. The 3rd Regiment commander, Huboer's face was red as he stretched his neck. Isn't luck a reflection of strength? We only have 20,000 men, yet we managed to defeat 25,000 of the Turks. 20,000 of them were taken captive, and we only lost 1,000 of our own cavalry. How is this not a great victory? Tian Hu said in a low voice. Even though he had always been competing with Su He, and knew that Su He's new army had always wanted to surpass him, as an opponent, he had to admit that Su He's new army had fought beautifully in this battle. Even in the eyes of the 1st Cavalry Division, this was the best they could do. After Tian Hu's reprimand, Huboer didn't say anything else. He was convinced by this battle result. The 4th Regiment commander, Bai Shuang, also had his head lowered. He could feel the tension in the tent. It wasn't a good thing for a general to be anxious before the battle had even begun. He decided to stand out. He raised his head and said, Division commander, regimental commanders, since the new army has already taken the credit, if we want to perform better, we have to think of a way to achieve the results. Think of a way to achieve the results? Regiment commander Bai, what do you mean? The 1st Regiment commander, Taimur, scratched his head. He didn't dare to underestimate this student of Bugnam of Gojoseon anymore, but sometimes he just couldn't understand what he was saying. Haha, it's like this, Bai Shuang said humbly. We won't be able to take the credit no matter what. Since that was the case, it was better not to think about it and focus on how to conquer Hobak Seri at the same time while doing so at the same time with the least cost. Didn't the new army lose 1,000 men? If we only lose 100 men, or even less, to take down the target and report it to teacher, then don't you think we'll have contributed as much? These words made the other regimental commander's eyes light up. The 5th Regiment commander, Gong Feng, was the first to nod and say, That's right. Regiment Commander Bai's words make sense. I agree. I agree as well. The 1st Regiment Commander, Teimu, also hurriedly expressed his opinion. The 2nd Regiment Commander, Lu Duo, and the 3rd Regiment Commander, Hu Boer, also expressed their opinions. Even Division Commander, Tian Hu, nodded in approval. Regiment Commander Bai, do you have any ideas? Yes, your subordinate does have an idea. If we want to force our way in, we'll have to suffer losses no matter what. Since that's the case, why don't we change it to using our wits? If Division Commander agrees, I'm willing to take a trip into the city and meet the enemy general guarding Hobox. Bai Shuang said with a face full of confidence. Enter the tiger's den? Tian Hu frowned when he heard that. Then, he asked, How confident are you? At least 70%. Ha ha, Senior Master, no one would have thought that we would have such a big appetite. We would first cut off Yi Li's retreat to the north, and then we would have the opportunity to strike first. This is our advantage, and we would have the element of surprise. Bai Shuang explained the general idea in his mind to everyone. Soon, the tent was filled with discussions. Hobak Seri. As the northernmost city in Ili, the higher-ups never paid much attention to this place. In comparison, regardless of whether it was Turpan or Yirkiang, it was extremely far away. Thus, the general guarding the city had always been in a state of peace. No one would have thought that the great Ili's retreat would be cut off. Naturally, the general guarding Hobak Seri, Mediz, would never have thought of this. Even though he had already learned from other sources that Turpan's 8 miles lost formation was about to become the most advanced formation, he still couldn't raise the alarm in his heart. This was one of the most fatal manifestations of the lack of information. Due to the lack of consciousness, the gates of Hobak Seri were still wide open. From time to time, Ili civilians could be seen entering and leaving. Bai Shuang walked into the city under such relaxed conditions. Bai Shuang didn't expect things to go so smoothly. When he and his 300 elite soldiers successfully entered the city after disguising themselves, he sighed for Mediz, and even more so for the entire city. Immediately send out a communication signal. Find our intelligence personnel in the city and get a clear picture of the situation. Bai Shuang said to one of his subordinates, and then walked towards the largest inn in the city. As early as when Yang Chendong was dealing with the Japanese army, he had given orders to the intelligence department, asking them to find out the situation of the various forces in the Ili region as soon as possible, including the personal information of the generals. Bai Shuang's idea was very simple. Go straight to the root of the problem. Capture the general when the enemy was unprepared and take over Hobak Seri without shedding a drop of blood. All of this started when he entered the city. Now it seemed that everything was going smoothly. But what was unexpected was that the plan was still ruined by someone, and it was their own people who ruined it. All of this started after he checked into the inn and met the intelligence personnel of the Security Bureau. Wukong Wu Tsong was a mixed blood. His father was Han, and his mother was Uyghur. As a result, he had a tall figure and a handsome appearance. He was a department of the Security Bureau led by Yang San. Normally, the more ordinary an intelligence personnel was, the better. On the contrary, if he was too handsome or too outstanding, it wouldn't be suitable. But because of his unique background, Yang San finally gave him an important task after meeting and evaluating him. It could be said that if Wu Tsong performed well, his future would be limitless. After being valued by Yang San, Wu Tsong brought enough money to the Ili area to start his work. Hobok Seri was one of his main targets. According to Yang San, the sixth young master was a great emperor. He was particular about not doing anything, but when he did, he would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. Once the enemy made a move in the Ili area, he had to do his best to get rid of them. With this principle in mind, Hobok Seri, which was the route to the north, naturally became a top priority. Wu Tsong put a part of his energy there. In order to get accurate first-hand information, he didn't hesitate to come to Hobok Seri in person. He thought he had done a good job and paid enough attention. But what Wu Tsong didn't expect was that there was another person who beat him to it. That was the sworn enemy of the Security Bureau, the CIA. Chapter 12:10. They had been established relatively late, but with the backing of the seventh Madam, Su Manor, it meant that they had strong support and backing. In addition, they had opened up another path, and their members were all women, especially beautiful women. This made their abilities and influence not weaker than the Security Bureau. Just like in Hobok Seri City, the people from the CIA had the same idea as Wu Tsong and made a move first. Commander Bai, the CIA's team leader, Han Fang, contacted General Mediz before us, and Wu Tsong's report suddenly became a little hesitant. And what? Bai Shuang, who was listening seriously, looked at Wu Tsong in confusion. Although some things were not pleasant to hear, since Bai Shuang asked, Wu Tsong could only tell him the truth. And team leader Han Fang has changed her name to Madanazer. She will be married to Mediz tonight. What? Bai Shuang, who was a little surprised, stood up involuntarily and digested the news. He had heard that the CIA would often sacrifice themselves or even give themselves to others in order to achieve their goals. However, in his opinion, it was just a show. After all, in this era, women cherished their bodies and reputation very much. However, he did not expect it to be true. Looking at Wu Tsong's embarrassed expression, it was obvious that the truth of the matter was not to be doubted. Bai Shuang, who was extremely surprised, took a while to calm himself down. Team leader Wu, tell me more about Han Fang. Yes. After Wu Tsong agreed, he explained the situation in detail. According to him, Han Fang was not a Han. Instead, she was an authentic Xibe. She was born in an ordinary family, but because of her beauty, she could sing and dance since she was young. In the age of war, it was always difficult for women to find a good home. Han Fang's family was also drifting and difficult to settle down. Later on, when the origin city was established, it attracted the attention of many people of other races. The peaceful living environment, rich material and cultural life there attracted many knowledgeable people, and Han Fang was one of them. Because of her beauty, when she just turned 18, she was engaged to a new deputy battalion officer in Shurqing. Finally, her life was stable. However, the heavens were unpredictable. Her husband actually went to the battlefield and died in the battle with Ili Bali. She once again became a rootless duckweed. Fortunately, the 5-star army took good care of the families of martyrs, so she didn't have to sleep on the streets again. However, the quality of her life was also very different from before. It was at this time that an intelligence agent from the CIA took a fancy to her and recruited her into the organization. Later, with her outstanding performance, she became one of the core members of the organization. This time, when Han Fang heard that they were going to mobilize troops against Ili, she wanted to avenge her husband, so she naturally signed up. Because of her outstanding performance, she was appointed as the team leader. That was how she got in touch with Mediz first, but she didn't expect that she would take the risk herself. You said that she is the wife of a deputy battalion commander in the new army? After Bai Shuang heard this, he had a general understanding of the matter. However, when he thought about how this person was a family member of a 5-star army officer, and now, in order to complete his mission, he had to submit himself to the enemy's general. Naturally, he felt indignant. Yes. Wu Bun answered without daring to conceal anything. How bold of you! Don't you remember what the teacher said? No one can force the families of martyrs to do anything. The CIA dared to do this. Aren't they afraid that the teacher will punish them? At this moment, Bai Shuang was so angry that his face was red. Even if the CIA's backer was the seventh madam, so what? In Bai Shuang's eyes, he couldn't use the families of martyrs as an excuse. Otherwise, it would make the officers and soldiers very sad. With Wu Tsong's status, he naturally didn't dare to voice out his doubts. Seventh madam was an existence that a nobody like him couldn't afford to offend. If he really said something unpleasant, once it spread out, he was afraid that his head would be separated from his body. Not only could he not question it, but he also had to try his best to absolve it. It was not for anything else, but because he had to tell the truth. Commander Bai, I'm afraid it's not what you think. I've seen Han Fang once, and she also took the initiative to tell me that no one forced her to do what she did. Everything she did was voluntary. Voluntary? After Bai Shuang heard this, he didn't understand. I'm afraid she had no choice but to say that. After all, there are some people that a little girl like her can't afford to offend. It doesn't seem like it. Wu Tsong didn't know how to explain it, so he could only say what he felt. He could also see that Bai Shuang was very angry about this matter. This was one of the students that Bug Nam of Gojoseon valued very much. On the other side was Bug Nam of Gojoseon's seventh madam. He couldn't afford to offend either of them. Once the matter got out of hand, he didn't know if others would be in trouble, but it was very likely that he would be the first to be in trouble. After all, he only had the director of the security bureau, Yang San, behind him. Not to mention, his identity in the entire security bureau wasn't considered an important person. Even if Wu Tsong wanted to protect his own safety, he had to try his best to smooth things over. However, looking at Bai Shuang's angry appearance, he felt that the matter wouldn't be so easy to solve. That's enough. After this matter is settled, I will personally go and ask Han Fang. If she is willing, I will naturally not be able to say anything. However, if someone wants to force her, regardless of who is behind her, I will report this matter to teacher and demand an explanation. Bai Shuang could feel Wu Tsong's difficulty. In fact, he didn't want to offend the seventh madam because of other people's matters. However, since he encountered this matter, he would ask for justice. Wasn't this what Yang Chendong usually taught them? Putting this matter aside for the time being, Bai Shuang asked Wu Tsong, "You're saying that tonight is the day Midis marries Han Fang? Then he will definitely hold a big banquet." Yes, now in the city of Hobokseli, everyone with status has received an invitation. Well, Leader Wu, I'll have to trouble you to get me an invitation too. Bai Shuang nodded, his eyes revealing a terrifying sharpness. He had already investigated everything and had a perfect plan to take action. However, now, he had to take action early. He was afraid that if he was late, the martyr's widow would be humiliated. This was definitely something he didn't want to see and couldn't accept. Wu Tsong faintly guessed Bai Shuang's intention, but he couldn't refuse. The orders from above were for him to cooperate unconditionally. He could only sigh in his heart and clasped his fist. Please don't worry, Leader Bai. The invitation will be sent soon. With Wu Tsong's ability and the group under him operating in Hobokseli for a while, it was just an invitation. It wasn't that complicated. In the afternoon, the invitation was sent to Bai Shuang. Considering that it was a banquet and not a battle, Bai Shuang didn't bring too many people. He only chose 4 elite warriors to follow him. At the same time, after making some arrangements for the people staying in the inn, when night came, he excitedly went to the general's mansion in the city. Midis' mansion was now brightly lit and bustling with activity. Midis, who was already in his 40s, already had a main wife and 4 concubines. Normally, there was no need to make such a big fuss when he was marrying a concubine. Moreover, it just so happened that the 5-star army was attacking, so everything should be done in a low-key manner. However, Medina Nazar had requested for a grand celebration. She claimed that she was getting married, and this was the happiest time in a woman's life. Of course, it had to be grand. Moreover, wouldn't such a grand wedding be able to achieve the purpose of consolidating and stabilizing the hearts of the people in the city? Midis was speechless when he heard that. He thought about it and agreed. Of course, This was also the reason why he was drooling over her beauty. He had been in Ely for a long time, and had seen many women, but this was the first time he had seen someone as beautiful as Madame Nazar. If such a beauty had any request, as long as it was within his capabilities, he would naturally agree to it with a nod. Thus, there was such a lively scene. There were people coming and going in the courtyard of the general's mansion. There were all kinds of people wearing luxurious clothes, chatting in groups of 3 to 5. Bai Shuang, who was dressed like a wealthy merchant, also wore a set of luxurious clothes that the concubine had gotten him as he walked in the courtyard. He had a smile on his face, showing his friendly and amiable side. However, if one were to observe him closely, they would notice that his eyes were always looking into the distance from time to time. That was because he was observing the structure of the houses here, thinking about the best place to strike if he were to make a move. The original plan was to first figure out the military layout in the city, then take control of Mediz. This was double insurance. However, because of the matter with Han Fang, he had to make a move in advance, so he had to be careful. There were more and more people in the courtyard. Roughly counting, there were no less than 300 people, and they were either rich or respectable people. If this was the case, it was likely that almost all the people with some status in the city had arrived. Bai Shuang walked alone in the courtyard, shuttling through the crowd. His eyes even looked at the courtyard to the side. That was where all the followers were staying. As if he was walking casually, Bai Shuang came to a place very close to this courtyard, so that he could send out a signal and lure out 4 elite soldiers to help him. The sky was completely dark, and the auspicious time had arrived. The originally noisy courtyard quickly quieted down. In the direction of the main hall, the 7-foot-tall Mediz finally appeared. Just from his appearance, this person had a tall and sturdy physique, and was also a fierce general. It was a pity that the beard on his face made him look too old. When the bride Madame Nazar appeared beside him with the help of her maidservant, the contrast between the two was even stronger. Chapter 12:11. Ha ha ha, thank you all for coming. As the host, Mediz laughed heartily. After greeting everyone, he introduced her to everyone. This is my new concubine, Madame Nazar. Please say a few words to everyone. Aya, the general is so lucky. The general's charm is amazing, that's why the beauty likes him. The general is very brave, if I were the beauty, I would choose him too. Yes, this is what it means to be a beauty with a hero. I've finally seen this scene, ha ha. Immediately, the compliments came one after another. When Mediz heard it, he laughed even more heartily. It was truly a joyous scene. The compliments and boot-licking continued, but soon, a sweet and clear voice stopped. Madame Nazar spoke. Hello everyone, I'm Madame Nazar. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you? I am madam, there's no need to be so polite. This is what we should do. Yes, the general protects our safety. Now that he's happy, it's only right that we come to congratulate him. Following that was another wave of disgusting flattery. Mediz did not reject any of it, and accepted it all. At that moment, he was very happy. He could not only get the beauty, he could also use this opportunity to receive a big gift. No matter how he thought about it, he was very happy. The flattery continued in the crowd. Someone started to make a fuss and asked the two to drink cross-cupped wine. Cross-cupped wine had long been spread from the great Ming dynasty. This was a new thing that Yang Chendong started, and it was quickly accepted by the crowd. Hearing this, Mediz naturally did not reject it. He laughed and said, All right, let's drink. Men, bring the wine. There was no goblet or glass. Such an expensive item was simply out of reach. She brought over 2 exquisite porcelain cups and filled them with white wine. Then, she handed them to Mediz and Madame Nazar respectively. Then, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, a man and a woman, one old and one young, intertwined their arms together. This scene also attracted the cheers of many onlookers. Unlike everyone else, Bai Shuang, who was hidden in the crowd, was ready to send out a signal. He would not allow himself to see a martyr's widow begging the enemy's general. even though doing so would greatly reduce his chances of success. After all, most of the 300 elite soldiers he brought were outside the general's residence. There were only 4 soldiers inside the residence. Even so, he still wanted to rush out and stop everything. In his eyes, this was his mission, the mission of an ordinary 5-star army officer. Of course, he had to admit that Han Fang, who had changed her name to Madenazer, was really beautiful. When he first saw her, even he was stunned. Bai Shuang was ready to act. As soon as he blew the whistle, the 4 elite soldiers would immediately rush into the courtyard with their weapons and kill at will. If possible, it would be best if they could subdue Medes. Even if it was not possible, he wanted to create chaos here and give the 300 elite soldiers enough time to rush in and surround everything. Bai Shuang, who had already made up his mind and was about to blow the whistle, suddenly stopped. What happened next was completely out of his expectations. Madenazer, who was drinking wine, suddenly had a shiny dagger in her left hand. At this moment, she was pressing it against Medes' neck. This was a very dramatic scene. Everyone in the courtyard was shocked and stood there as if they were petrified. Even at this moment, many people still did not understand what was happening. Was this a prearranged show? The reason why they said this was because the other main character, Medes, did not show any signs of panic. On the contrary, his expression was normal. It was as if the target of the dagger was not him, but someone else who had nothing to do with him. The courtyard suddenly became silent. This scene also made Bai Shuang stop what he was doing. He wanted to see what Han Fang was trying to do. Under everyone's attention, Medes laughed sinisterly. "What's wrong, madam? What are you doing? Don't you know that swords have no eyes? It's easy to hurt people like this, and it's even easier to hurt yourself." As he spoke, Medes raised his left hand to remove the dagger from his neck. However, at the same time, a pleasant voice sounded. "Don't move. Let me tell you, this dagger has been infected with a strong poison. If you're cut by it, I guarantee that you'll lose your life in an instant. If you want to live, you have to listen to everything I say." "Strong poison?" Hearing this, everyone in the courtyard could not help but panic. At this moment, everyone clearly saw that this was not a prearranged show. This madam really wanted to take Medes' life. They didn't expect that the new concubine, who was supposed to be brought to the boudoir and waiting to enter the bridal chamber, would have such a fierce side. Everyone was shocked, and at the same time, they were even more curious about how General Medes would deal with this situation. "Strong poison?" Mei Sai was surprised, but he wasn't as scared as everyone thought. Instead, he laughed. "Beauty, don't joke with me. Do you really think I'll believe you just because you made up a random reason?" Mei Sai was stunned for a moment, but he wasn't as scared as everyone thought he was. "You don't believe me? Then try it if you can." Medina was very confident when she said these words, giving people a feeling that she was very sure of herself. After hearing this tone, everyone could not help but believe it. Only Medes laughed and said, "I don't believe you. Try it if you can." After saying that, he deliberately moved his neck forward and touched the tip of the dagger. The dagger was indeed sharp. With just a touch, it left a bloody mark on Medes' neck. This shocked Medina, who was holding the dagger, and she could not help but let go of the dagger. She did not want to take Medes' life. At least, she did not want to take his life before she completed the mission. A dead general was far less important than a living general who could listen to her orders. However, the plan could not keep up with the changes. Not only did Medes not believe her, he even tried to test the dagger with his own body. At this moment, she was caught off guard. Everything did not go according to plan. She only felt that her mind was blank. In the eyes of everyone, Medina's performance was not a big deal. Instead, they were shocked by General Medes' courage. Only Bai Shuang, who was in the crowd, had a bad feeling. This was not the time to be distracted. Just as Bai Shuang was about to warn Medes, the moment Medina let her guard down, Medes made his move. His right arm that was holding the wine suddenly loosened. When the bowl fell to the ground, his right hand freed up to grab the dagger. The tables had turned in an instant. Medina was stunned. But what she didn't expect was that as the porcelain cup fell to the ground, there was a crisp sound, and nearly 100 Turpan soldiers suddenly swarmed into the courtyard. As soon as they appeared, they surrounded Madenazer and her maidservants tightly. Mediz, who was already outside the circle, shouted loudly again. "Ha ha ha! You dare to use such a little trick against me? I'm afraid you don't know that I've already replaced the dagger in your hand. Ha ha ha! Do you think I'm a 3-year-old kid who can be easily fooled by you? You said you were born in Hobokseli. I've already sent people to investigate. There's no such thing. Tell me, why did you lie to me like this?" Mediz's words left Madenazer's mouth, and she was stunned again and again. Just a moment ago, she thought she was exposed. She thought he knew her identity. But now, it seemed that Mediz did not know. He only found the problem from her fabricated background. So, it did not affect the overall situation. Although the current situation was very unfavorable for her, Medina wasn't afraid. Even if she died, it wouldn't be considered as a failure of the mission. In that case, she would die a worthy death. Medina's expression gradually returned to normal when she realized that her actions had not spoiled the overall situation. Her voice rang out again. "Mediz, you're a scumbag. I'm only here to avenge my personal grudge. Now that you've seen through me, I'll let you do whatever you want to me." As she spoke, Medina purposely puffed out her chest, and at the same time, removed the veil covering her face. Madenazer was already very beautiful. Even a thin veil was unable to hide her beauty. Now that she was gone, her true appearance was completely exposed to everyone, causing waves of exclamations to erupt from the crowd. Following her action, a commotion broke out in the courtyard. Some of the maids who were pouring wine for the officials and nobles suddenly had short knives in their hands. Then, they slashed in all directions, causing chaos. It was obvious that this was Medina's backup plan. The signal to take action was to remove the veil. This scene also caused chaos. Even Bai Shuang, who was in the crowd, was targeted by a maid. However, he did not attack. Instead, he cleverly dodged and used this opportunity to move to the front of the main hall. "How dare you touch my guest? Take her down!" Mediz's face turned ugly at this moment. He knew that this woman wouldn't have simply prepared a poisoned dagger. Now, it seemed like he was right. Fortunately, he was prepared. He called over 100 soldiers. When he shouted, the soldiers surrounded the maids in the courtyard. Chapter 12:12. There were less than 10 maids in total, and they were all intelligence agents of the CIA. Some of them were only on the periphery, and their training was limited. The only reason they could create chaos earlier was because of the daggers in their hands. Now that they were facing the Turkmen soldiers armed with spears and swords, they had no advantage at all. They were about to be surrounded. Taking advantage of the chaos, Bai Shuang easily made his way to the front of the hall. He estimated the distance with his eyes, then whistled loudly. With a leap, he landed beside Madenazer. Suddenly, a shadow appeared and landed beside her. Madenazer instinctively wanted to retreat, but at the same time, she heard a soft voice. "Don't panic. I am Bai Shuang, the commander of the 4th Regiment of the 5th Star Army's 1st Cavalry Division. If you want to live, follow me closely." Before he could finish his sentence, Bai Shuang's right hand reached for his waist, and a flexible sword appeared in his hand. He thrust it at Madenazer, who was 2 meters away from him. Although they were both assassins, Madenazer and Bai Shuang were not on the same level. The difference between them could be described as heaven and earth. With just one stab, Madenazer's right arm was injured, and he couldn't help but cry out in pain. Madenazer was a weak woman, and Madenazer was nothing to him. Therefore, he thought he was the safest. He didn't expect Bai Shuang to appear out of nowhere, and use such a sharp sword technique. His right arm was injured because of a moment of carelessness. Out of instinct, the injured Madenazer retreated while shouting at the Turkmen soldiers around him. "Men, take them down! Take them down!" Bai Shuang appeared too quickly, and the speed of his sword was too fast, so the soldiers didn't react in time. Now that the general's voice was heard, the ordinary soldiers immediately responded and rushed towards Bai Shuang. In a short period of time, no less than 30 soldiers had come here. This was all thanks to the 4 elite soldiers who had appeared after hearing the whistle. They had shared some of the firepower. Otherwise, there would have been even more people coming to surround and capture them. Bai Shuang's expression turned serious. He turned to Madenazer and asked, "How is it? Are you scared?" "No." Although Madenazer's body was trembling, she still answered bravely. "Then, since you're not afraid, let's start a massacre here today." "Ha!" Bai Shuang laughed as she reached her left hand into her pocket. She took out a Type 54 pistol and 2 magazines and handed them to Madenazer. "Do you know how to use this?" "This is a pistol. I've learned how to use it before, but I'm afraid I can't shoot accurately." Madenazer's eyes lit up when she saw the object handed to her. "It's fine. They're so close. Even if we can't beat them to death, we'll scare them to death. All right, I'm going to make my move. Remember to follow me closely." After Bai Shuang finished speaking in a short amount of time, the soft sword in his right hand shook. It turned into a long dragon and suddenly thrust forward. Fighting 1 against 30 was already a test for White Shuang, not to mention that there was a weak woman behind him that needed to be protected. But even so, he would not back down. This was his duty as a professional soldier, and more importantly, as a man. With a roar, Bai Shuang stepped forward and stabbed out with his sword, striking the chest of a Turfan soldier. The sword was pulled out, and blood spurted out. The soldier on the other side fell to the ground. 1. Bai Shuang's lips moved slightly as he spoke softly. Madenazer, who was behind him, heard everything. She was shocked and blushed. Bai Shuang's entire body was emitting a masculine scent. She, who was very close to him, felt the same way. Swoosh! Bai Shuang thrust out his sword again, then pulled it back. 2. Bang! After a deafening gunshot, Madenazer's voice rang out. 3. Haha, well done! Bai Shuang praised from the bottom of his heart. Then, his long sword danced like a snake, forming an impenetrable net to kill the enemy and protect himself at the same time. Bai Shuang's sudden appearance made the already chaotic situation even more chaotic. Many of the officials and nobles who came to celebrate saw the bloody scene. They screamed and ran out of the courtyard. But they quickly retreated, not for any other reason, but because there were countless black-clothed soldiers rushing in from the outside. As these people rushed in, firecrackers were set off outside the general's mansion. This was Wu Tsong's masterpiece. They wanted to use the sound of firecrackers to cover up the sounds of killing in the general's mansion. The 290 elite soldiers of the 5-star army who stayed outside finally arrived. As soon as they appeared, their swords danced, and those who stood in their way were either dead or injured. "Stop them! Stop them!" Madenazer, who had been stabbed in the right arm, thought he had the situation under control. He did not expect the enemy to have more people than him. At this moment, his expression became very ugly. He regretted it. If he knew this would happen, he would have taken down Madenazer earlier. Why did he have to put on this show? Fortunately, he was afraid that Madenazer would find out, so he only mobilized 100 soldiers this time. Now, it seemed that he had miscalculated. But there was still a chance. For example, he could capture Bai Shuang or Madenazer and use them to threaten them. There was still a chance to turn the situation around. Immediately, he shouted at the soldiers guarding beside him. "Quick, charge! Take down this adulterous couple! Take them down!" With this shout, the pressure Bai Shuang faced increased. The number of enemies in front of him increased from a few to more than 10. He would never do something like blasphemy. Seeing that Bai Shuang didn't answer, Madenazer pouted. She then whispered, "To be able to die together with the general, this little girl is content." The voice wasn't very clear, but since they were so close, Bai Shuang still heard it clearly. His face immediately turned red. Madenazer saw this scene and couldn't help but laugh. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, a few arrows were fired. The elite soldiers of the 5-star army finally rushed into the courtyard and attacked Matanazer, who was standing in front of the hall. Dozens of soldiers died one after another. Even Matanazer himself was hit by 2 arrows. After he fell to the ground, the situation was settled. The inside and outside of the general's mansion were under the control of the 5-star army. They had taken a risk, but they had actually succeeded. Aside from luck, the most important reason for their success was Matanazer's plan. Her idea was simple. First, she would control Matanazer, then use his mouth to control the upper echelons of the city. Then, she would create chaos from the bottom to prepare for the arrival of the 5-star army. Her plan was generally feasible, but it wasn't perfect. Bai Shuang's arrival helped her perfect everything, making what happened next seem like a miracle. Chapter 12-13. Under the blades of the 5-star army, those who were afraid of death and wanted to live all lowered their heads and promised to cooperate fully. This included General Mediz, who looked very brave just a moment ago. There was no other way. When his sword cut into White Shuang's back, it was so deep that it exposed the bone. Seeing their regiment commander suffer such an injury, the soldiers under him naturally wouldn't be kind to him. They would use whatever method was effective. In just a short while, this general who had lived a comfortable life for many years lowered his head and surrendered. With the help of these high-ranking officers, after their letters were sent to their subordinates through the 5-star army, Hobox-Seri city no longer had any defenses. A bright light shot out from within the city. The 20,000 cavalrymen of the world's 1st Division who had been lying in ambush in the city entered from all 4 sides, achieving their goal of occupying this border city without shedding a single drop of blood. Someone, report to the 6th young master that we have occupied Hobox-Seri city without any losses. Next, we will move from the north to the south, leaving the Ala mountain pass and marching towards the capital city of Ili. Riding on his horse, Division Commander Tian Hu laughed as he spoke to the reporter. Then, he looked at the 4 regimental commanders and said, let's go take a look at the injured hero regimental commander. Haha, let's go. Temu and the other 3 laughed. They weren't here to laugh at White Shuang, nor were they gloating over his injury. It was just that getting injured was a common occurrence for them. Sometimes, getting injured was even a symbol of honor. With Division Commander Tian Hu as the leader, the 5 of them each brought some elites, and went straight to the general's mansion. This was now White Shuang's temporary place to recuperate. After the 5 of them entered the courtyard, other than seeing the strict security, they also saw a beautiful figure carrying a basin of clear water towards the back of the mansion. Her voice was as clear as an oriole's. I'm going to change the regimental commander's dressing. No one is allowed to disturb him. Don't worry, Miss Han. The 5-star army soldier in charge of guarding the place nodded solemnly. He almost patted his chest and promised. Without noticing Tian Hu and the others behind her, the woman strode towards the backyard, leaving the crowd outside dumbfounded. This girl's figure isn't bad. I saw her side profile just now and she's very pretty. Commander Bai is in luck this time. The 3rd commander, Hu Boer, chuckled and said. It's said that beauties love heroes. I've heard that Commander Bai saved a very beautiful woman during this mission. Now, it seems like it's true. Sigh, I knew there was such a good thing, so I rushed over. An envious voice sounded. Tian Hu's action caused the other 4 commanders to be shocked. Then, the 2nd commander Lu Duo kindly reminded him. Division Commander, it's not good to trouble the 7th madam for such a small matter. Also, this woman's identity isn't suitable for Commander Bai. This so-called unsuitable could be divided into 2 types. The first was out of respect. The second was due to the difference in status. Bai Shuang was the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. He was also the student of the 6th young master. Although he was only a commander, if he left here and became a division commander somewhere else, he would be a great general who could take charge of a region. How could Tian Hu not understand this logic? However, he still firmly said, disturbing the 7th madam shouldn't be a problem. We're doing this for the sake of fairness. Also, even if we want to give Commander Bai an explanation, there are some issues that need to be investigated. Men, go. After a full hour, Han Fang's delicate figure appeared. She was still holding a basin of water, but it was no longer clear. Instead, it was dyed red with blood. When she came out, she saw Tian Hu and the others. Although they didn't know each other before, the Major General's star on his shoulder was very eye-catching. Immediately, Han Fang hurriedly knelt on the ground, looking like she wanted to pay her respects. Miss Han, there's no need to be so courteous. You know that our 5-star army doesn't like this. Tian Hu hurriedly spoke out to stop her. At the same time, he sized up Han Fang's body. Then, he nodded, looking very satisfied. Many thanks for General's understanding. Han Fang, who had already changed back to her name, bowed slightly and said with gratitude. No need to be so polite. Oh right, how is Commander Bai now? Can we go visit him now? Tian Hu finally remembered the important matter and asked Han Fang. At the same time, he tightly grasped the investigation telegram that he had just received. It must be said that telegrams were very convenient. When the telegram was sent to the 7th Madam, she found out that it was from the 1st Cavalry Division. Naturally, she attached great importance to it. Soon, Han Fang's situation was reported back. Because of this, Tian Hu was even more certain of one thing. Of course you can. Commander Bai's situation is already much better. Generals, please go ahead and visit him. Han Fang said very politely. Many thanks. Tian Hu smiled and cupped his fists. Then, he led the 4 regimental commanders and strode towards the backyard, leaving behind Han Fang, who looked at everyone's backs with envy. However, not long after, she sighed. Perhaps she thought of her own identity. In the backyard, Bai Shuang was already sitting up. There was a pillow on his back that perfectly supported his bandaged chest. At this moment, he was reading a military book. When he heard the footsteps outside, he didn't raise his head and said, Miss Han, I'm fine here. If you have something to do, you should go and do it first. Oh my, our Commander Bai is always talking about Miss Han. It seems that he really does miss her. Gong Feng's voice sounded from outside the door. As 2 regimental commanders who had joined the 1st Cavalry Division at the same time, their relationship had always been good. They could joke about any kind of thing. Hearing this voice, Bai Shuang was stunned. Then, the figures of Tian Hu and the 4 regimental commanders appeared in his line of sight. He immediately smiled. Out of courtesy, he wanted to get up. Tian Hu, who was walking at the front, quickly waved his hand. Since you're already injured, why bother with the etiquette? Quickly sit down. Ha! Bai Shuang laughed somewhat embarrassedly. Although he didn't get up, the military book in his hand had already been placed to the side and his body was much straighter. How are you? Are you all right? The 5 of them each found a place to sit and asked about Bai Shuang's injury. Bai Shuang, who wasn't injured for the first time, shook his head. I'm fine. I was just stared at by a mosquito. If there's a mission right now, I can still get on the horse. Forget it. Do you really think that our 1st Cavalry Division doesn't have anyone else? Do you think we need an injured regimental commander to charge into battle? The other regimental commanders immediately laughed and joked. Although the 6 of them met to visit Bai Shuang, they quickly talked about military matters. Bai Shuang also knew that the 1st Cavalry Division was going to head to the Ala mountain pass and prepare to attack the capital city of Ili. Unfortunately, Hobok Seri City needed someone to temporarily guard it until Yang Chenong's troops took over the defense line. As the injured Bai Shuang, he naturally had to take on this task. This was naturally to take care of Bai Shuang. Bai Shuang couldn't say anything about this. What, were they really going to let him, an injured regimental commander, go with the army? If so, which regiment should he leave behind to guard it? He had just made a great contribution, so he had to give the other regimental commanders a chance to perform. Chapter 12-14. After weighing the pros and cons, Bai Shuang resolutely agreed. At this moment, The other 4 regimental commanders all breathed a sigh of relief. Obviously, they were still somewhat worried that Bai Shuang would disagree. In this way, one of them would have to stay behind. Bai Shuang, you don't have to worry too much. The 6th young master has already sent a telegram. The team sent from the logistics camp of the first city has already passed Iji. It won't be long before they arrive at Hoboksari city and switch with you. Take this opportunity to have a good rest and train the army at the same time. Now that each of your regiments has doubled the number of soldiers, the combat effectiveness must be improved correspondingly. Otherwise, we will fail to live up to the 6th young master's expectations of us. Division Commander Tian, who comforted him loudly. Yes, thank you for your concern, Division Commander and brothers. Bai Shuang smiled. He really wanted to train the army well, especially the army's coordination and combat ability. It was just that they had not had a good rest since the expansion. They could only train during the journey. Now that there was an opportunity, of course, he had to seize it. After they finished talking about the important matters, more than half an hour had passed. There were many things to do in the army. After the 4 regimental commanders looked at each other, they all got up and left. However, Division Commander Tian, who did not leave with the crowd for the first time. Instead, he watched the 4 regimental commanders salute him and leave one by one. When there were only 2 people left in the room, Bai Shuang asked curiously, Division Commander, is there anything else or a mission? There are things, and there are also missions. But before that, I want to ask you something first. Tian Hu said with a serious face. Bai Shuang's face immediately became a lot more serious. Yes, Division Commander, please give the order. Okay. After Tian Hu made a sound of agreement, he looked at Bai Shuang, who had a solemn expression, and asked a question that was completely unexpected and unexpected. What is your impression of Lady Han Fang? Stunned. For nearly 10 breaths, Bai Shuang did not answer. He sat there in a daze as if he was struck by lightning. It was not until Tian Hu coughed softly again that he seemed to remember something and said, Division Commander, did you ask the wrong question? I'm telling you, no, I'm talking to you on behalf of the division leader. Be serious. Tian Hu also knew that asking him to talk about this issue was a bit too much, but he had no choice. He thought about it for a while, and other than himself, there was no one else in the 1st Cavalry Division who was suitable to talk about this matter. If it were any other guild leader, the situation would only be worse, and the situation would become even more awkward. Tian Hu suddenly became so serious that Bai Shuang had no choice but to face this problem. However, he was very clear about Han Fang's situation. After all, she was the widow of a new battalion commander. Just based on this point alone, he couldn't have any other thoughts. Otherwise, it would be a form of disrespect to a martyr who had died. So after hesitating for a long time, he only opened his mouth and said, Lady Han is a good lady, but that's enough. You just need to know that she's a good girl. Tian Hu was waiting for this sentence. Of course, if he continued, then the situation would change. After saying this, he continued to ask in depth. Guild leader Bai Shuang, please answer this question seriously. Remember, I'm not asking you now. I'm asking you on behalf of the 1st Cavalry Division's division commander. If Lady Han Fang were to be your wife, would you be willing? What? That's impossible. When Bai Shuang heard this, he hurriedly waved his hands, as if there was a wild beast in front of him. He had no choice but to refuse. Why is it impossible? Is it because she was once engaged to a deputy battalion commander of the new First Army? Tian Hu suddenly raised his voice as he asked this question. Yes. Bai Shuang didn't completely understand the meaning of this sentence, because at this moment, his mind was already blank. Although he indeed had a good impression of Lady Han Fang, he definitely wouldn't do anything to betray a comrade for his own selfish reasons, even if that comrade had already died on the battlefield. Tian Hu was very satisfied with Bai Shuang's answer. He continued to ask, Then if I tell you that even if you marry Lady Han Fang now, you won't betray anyone, will you still refuse? HM? At this moment, Bai Shuang finally raised his head, as if he understood something. He looked at Tian Hu and asked, "Senior brother, what's going on?" The reason why he called him senior brother was because both of them studied under Yang Chendong. This kind of address was only used when there were no outsiders. "What's going on?" "Haha, you're lucky." Tian Hu, who had a serious face just a moment ago, was now full of smiles. "Let me tell you, I've already investigated. The person who asked was the 7th madam, and she's already given a reply. Lady Han Fong was indeed engaged to a new battalion commander, but it was only a verbal agreement. There wasn't even a ceremony, and they didn't even enter the bridal chamber. Unfortunately, that officer had already died on the battlefield. Now, Lady Han Fong is a free person, and the CIA has also confirmed this. She has the freedom to pursue a happy marriage, and it doesn't involve any moral or emotional issues. Do you understand now?" Tian Hu's words stunned Bai Shuang. After a long while, he asked with a face full of joy, "Is this true? If I marry her, it won't be a moral issue, and I won't be letting down that dead battalion commander, right?" "Of course not." This caused Bai Shuang to laugh loudly behind her. On the official road to Turpan City, an army with a bright flag of the 5-star Army was moving forward. Among them, a cavalry unit with black cloaks was especially eye-catching. In the 5-star Army, the rank of an officer was very obvious. It could be seen from the military rank, and it could also be seen from the cloak that an individual wore. As for the black cloak, it was usually only worn by those with the position of guild leader. The reason why it was said to be a normal situation was because there was something special about it. The black cavalry that protected Yang Chendong could also wear it. There were 2,000 black cavalry soldiers, and they were all wearing black cloaks. The 1,000 black cavalry that had been selected from Crimson City had finally arrived. Among them, Chiu Vi was the captain of the 1st Brigade, Dao Xiao was the captain of the 2nd Brigade, and Ba Daojiang was the vice-captain of the 1st Brigade due to his outstanding performance. Yang Chendong was in this unit. He was riding a white dragon and wearing a golden battle suit, which made him stand out from the rest. Beside him, Beta Persei was wearing a purple military cloak, which was also very eye-catching. Everyone looked at him with envy. "Young master, a telegram from the 1st Cavalry Division." In the carriage behind him, the leader of the telegram team, Wang Shan, sent a telegram to Beta Persei, and then handed it to Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong curiously turned around. "Didn't a telegram just arrive not long ago? Why is it here again?" Chapter 12:15. With a hint of curiosity, Yang Chendong took the telegram. He didn't think that anything would go wrong. With the combat ability of the 1st Cavalry Division and the fact that they had just doubled their forces, anyone who wanted to cause trouble for them would have to be prepared to lose their teeth. After receiving the telegram, Yang Chendong quickly scanned the contents of the telegram. Then, he burst into laughter. "Hee, White Shuang, spring has come." "Spring is coming?" Beta Persei obviously didn't understand the meaning of this sentence. Yang Chendong didn't explain. Instead, after a moment of silence, he said, "Let Wang Shan send a telegram to the 7th Madam to confirm the situation of a girl named Han Fong. Then send a telegram to Tiger's Mane to understand the specific situation of a girl named Han Fong and the battalion commander. Then report it." White Shuang was an orphan. As his teacher, he was no different from his parents. Of course, he had to make the decision for such a big matter. But before that, he had to make things clear. He didn't want to make a mistake. That would be a joke, and it would hurt the two young people's hearts. Yang Chendong gave the order. After the telegram was sent out, there was a quick reply. Obviously, everyone attached great importance to the matter that Bugnam of Gojoseon valued. It didn't take long for the matter of Han Fong to be investigated clearly. It was confirmed that she only had a verbal engagement with the deputy battalion commander who died in battle. The two of them didn't even meet. Everything was set up by the matchmaker. Later, after the deputy battalion commander died in battle, the matchmaker didn't care about this matter. If it wasn't for the fact that Han Feng valued friendship, very few people would know about this matter. After understanding the details, Yang Qindong immediately waved his pen and approved the marriage between White Shuang and Han Feng. He also allowed them to complete the wedding in Hobox. Not only that, Yang Qindong also ordered a small team of black cavalry to go to Hobox and bring a congratulatory gift. With Yang Qindong's blessing, no one would say anything about this matter. Of course, this wasn't a big deal, at least for Yang Xia's 5th Star Army. As his territory grew larger and his influence grew stronger, the number of officers in the army and the local government increased as well. Marriage was not known to the general public. Unless it was someone with a special status like Bai Shuang, it would not attract Yang Qindong's attention. His attention was now focused on the city of Turpan, which was a few hundred miles away. The intelligence department had already sent word that the Ili Kingdom and Yerkiang Kingdom had sent 30,000 troops each to Tuliafan City, seemingly intending to have a decisive battle with the 5-star army there. Young Master, do we need to urge 4th Master Lu to catch up from behind? Beta Persei also saw the report and suggested. There's no need. Do you think they will be stupid enough to let us attack a city after losing 8 miles? 4th Master Lu, it's better for you to escort the food from behind. Yang Qindong waved his hand confidently. The 3 countries actually wanted to fight with his main force. This was something he couldn't ask for more. Originally, he was most worried that he wouldn't be able to find the main force. Once the enemy scattered and implemented harassment tactics, he would have the biggest headache. But now that they wanted a decisive battle, he would fulfill their wish. As long as they could destroy the enemy's main force in one fell swoop, the speed of taking down this place would be much faster and save a lot of time. Send a message to the small Japanese Empire in Shurqing. Hurry up and send the small Japanese Empire to the front line. Such a large piece of land needs a lot of people. After Yang Qindong said this to Beta Persei, he looked forward. It wouldn't be long before the land under their feet would be surnamed Yang and then Han. In order to do it once and for all, the migration of the foreign people was necessary. In the Second World War, Japan had occupied Korea for more than 40 years and had also been entrenched in the northeast of China for a long time. However, the voices of resistance had never stopped. For this reason, a large number of Japanese troops and forces were involved. What was the reason? Was it just because the Japanese didn't treat them as human beings? This might be the main reason, but it wasn't the only reason. At least for a period of time, Japan had implemented a policy of controlling China with China. As long as the people didn't rebel, they were given a certain amount of security and protection, but the voices of resistance still didn't stop. The reason was that in addition to the backbone of the Chinese nation, the most important reason was that they could get the support and solidarity of the people by fighting on their own land. With these lessons learned from previous mistakes, Yang Qindong had long adopted an extreme method, which was the migration of the people. When all these people were thrown into chaos and changed to a new place, they suddenly had no brothers and sisters around them, no people of the same race. When they were not even familiar with the land under their feet, the so-called voices of resistance would naturally disappear. In short, without a suitable soil for survival, some things could not survive, and some ideas could not grow. Naturally, in order to achieve such a result, one would need to have a large territory to achieve the goal of migration. Obviously, Yang Qindong had such conditions. Now, in the Ili region, he was using the same method. He wanted to transfer the people from the other provinces to exchange with the people here, to achieve the effect of completely destroying and strangling the will of the people. Conquer the world and let the Han people live wherever there were people. Wherever there were people, the status of the Han people would be the highest, and all the Han people would be proud of their birth. This kind of slogan was not as simple as just saying. If he wanted to carry it out, it would be incredibly difficult. However, since Yang Qindong had brought the modern army here, he naturally had to do something. Even if he could not do it, he would let his descendants do it. In short, this was the goal that he had worked hard for. Looking at it now, the goal was indeed very big, but it was not impossible. Hadn't he already trampled on many small countries and made them part of the Han people's territory? The navy was also actively making preparations, especially after taking down the Japanese Empire and capturing who knows how many navies. Now they were very powerful, and it would not be long before they set out to conquer the world. Looking forward to the arrival of that day, Yang Chunong felt that the burden on his shoulders was heavy, but he was not afraid. With a light shout, he rode on the white dragon and led the army straight to Turpan City. Turpan City. At this moment, the whole city was in chaos. People could be seen everywhere on the streets, and from time to time, they would collide with each other. The people were busy moving their valuables out of the city. The soldiers were also busy moving their provisions and military supplies. Everyone was scrambling to get out of the city, as if they would be left behind forever if they were late. In such a chaotic situation, bumping into each other was inevitable. Even if many Turpan people were maintaining order in the city, they still could not alleviate the chaos. How could it be so easy to empty out the capital of Turpan in such a short period of time? Palace. The new king, Hardenbarter, was roaring with a face full of anger. Who was it? Who leaked the news? Investigate for this king. No wonder Hardenbarter was so angry. He had just made up his mind to withdraw from Turpan City, and the news spread out, causing the people to be in chaos, which affected the withdrawal of the army. The reason why he made this decision was because of the lesson of don't lose Lately. When he learned that the 5-star army had powerful artillery that could flatten an entire city, Hardenbarter knew that the so-called strong city was a joke in the eyes of the enemy. If he still defended the capital, the result would not be much better than don't lose Lately. It must be said that Hardenbarter was worthy of being the king who led the rise of Turpan City. He immediately made a decisive move, which was to withdraw from the city and fight the 5-star army on the grassland. In short, he would not defend the city. Originally, according to Hardenbarter's plan, he would withdraw the army first, and then move the people. But for some reason, the news was leaked, and now the city was in chaos. His plan to withdraw had to be delayed. After a series of roars, someone immediately went out of the palace to investigate the leak of the secret. But in such a chaotic situation, it was not easy to find out who leaked the secret. Not to mention, the people who leaked the secret were from the Yangtze Intelligence Department. They had strong anti-reconnaissance abilities, so it was not easy to find them in a short time. After venting his anger, Hardenbarter's expression seemed to be better. He looked at Daichin, who was standing in the hall, and waved his hand. General, how far is the 5-star army cavalry from us? My king, the closest, is less than 100 miles. Although he didn't want to answer this question, since the king asked, he could only tell the truth. 100 miles? Ha! Hearing this answer, Hardenbarter's expression froze for a moment, then he sneered. 100 miles, even the elite cavalry would take less than half a day to arrive. How many people and resources can we evacuate? Daichin was also shocked by the speed of the 5-star army cavalry. But as a general, he couldn't be afraid of the enemy. Otherwise, he would be unqualified and incompetent. Even though Daichin had lost the battle, but as a general, he had never lost his character. Seeing the king in such a difficult position, he hesitated for a moment, then steeled his heart and stood out. My king, I think there is a way. We can stop the 5-star army cavalry. Didn't the Ili Empire and Yirkiang Empire each send 30,000 cavalry and have already arrived at our Turpan City? As long as we can work with them, I am confident that we can fight the 5-star army and stop them outside Turpan City. Oh? Really? Hearing Daichin's confident words, Hardenbarter's eyes were filled with hope. Chapter 12:16. There shouldn't be a problem. Daichin's reply was straightforward, but there was one thing he didn't say. If the 3 armies all listened to him, then there wouldn't be a problem. Good. Seeing how confident Daichin was, Hardenbarter's anger disappeared and he said, If that's the case, then I'll order you to talk to them. As long as their request isn't too excessive, we can agree to it. Yes, Your Majesty. But I think we should continue to evacuate the city. After all, Tulyafan City is too close to the five-star army. No one knows what will happen. After Daichin received the order, he still gave his suggestion to be safe. Don't worry, this king will not let our people be threatened. In a while, I will give the order for everyone to withdraw to Kaliushi and rebuild the defensive line there. Harden Barter naturally did not place all his hopes on the coalition forces and had already made preparations for this. After knowing that His Majesty had a backup plan, Daichin could finally relax. He immediately walked out of the palace and headed towards the alliance camp outside the city. Before, the three countries had sat down together to discuss. In order to deal with the powerful five-star army, they had to unite. The result of the discussion was that if one side was attacked, the other two countries had to unconditionally provide support. It was just that some words sounded nice, like unconditional support. Then how many people should they send? 100,000 was reinforcements, but who could say 1,000 wasn't reinforcements? The so-called alliance was just to deal with the powerful five-star army. If there wasn't the five-star army, the three sides would still be in a hostile relationship. If they could defeat the five-star army and weaken their allies, this was probably everyone's goal. Because of this thought, Daichin also knew that it wouldn't be easy to convince the two allied armies to fight the five-star army. Ili sent out 30,000 cavalrymen to assist Tulyafan. The general leading them was Wuli Ji, who had fought against the Wu De army and suffered a great defeat. Yerkyang sent out 30,000 cavalrymen to assist Tulyafan. The general leading them was called Alefu. Next, Daichin wanted to find these two generals. As former opponents, they were naturally familiar with each other. Sometimes, they would even work together to deal with the other side. As an acquaintance, the moment they met, Daichin immediately stated his intentions. Generals, there's no need to say more about the current situation. The five-star army's target isn't just Turpan. They want the entire region. This time, I hope that we can work together sincerely to defeat the five-star army and protect the safety of the people of the country behind us. Both Uli Ji and Alefa silently nodded their heads in response to such pleasing words. No matter what they were thinking, they had to act as if they were working together. However, the king had said before that as long as the request wasn't too excessive, he would try his best to satisfy it. Thus, he suppressed the anger in his heart and asked, "But what kind of benefits does General Wuliji require? This, the most basic problem of food, you guys have to solve it, right? As for the war horses, you know that we came from afar and can't ask for help from the rear. Of course, if you can satisfy these conditions, my 30,000 cavalry will listen to General Daichin's orders." Wuliji stated his conditions. He had no choice. Prime Minister Arip told him to think of a solution himself. What good ideas did he have? He could only turn his attention to Turpan. It wasn't hard to solve the problem of rations, as Tulyafan had a lot of rations. However, Daichin obviously wouldn't agree to solve the problem of war horses. He shook his head and said, "I can give you the rations, but not the war horses. Our country doesn't have a lot of war horses." Hee. Hearing that there was no problem with the rations and hearing Daichin say that there were not many war horses, Waliji knew that there was hope. He immediately smiled. General Daichin's words are wrong. A while ago, when the grasslands were in chaos, the Turfan kingdom, which was closest to them, used a lot of rations to exchange for their war horses. If what I said is correct, there are at least 50,000 war horses in the horse field outside of Turfan. How about this? We won't ask for much, just 10,000 war horses from each side. Uliji was obviously prepared. When Daichin heard these words, his expression changed. 10,000 war horses is impossible. Although we have some more horses, they are prepared for the old soldiers. You know that after the military restructuring in Turpan, there are many retired soldiers among the people. Once they have war horses and sharp sabers, they can become soldiers again. These are for... Daichin still wanted to continue, but Wuliji interrupted him. 8,000 war horses. No, at most 3,000. 7,000. 3,500. The two generals, who led tens of thousands of troops, were like two unscrupulous merchants. After a round of bargaining, they finally set the number at 5,000. Since he could get food and 5,000 war horses, Uliji felt that he had reached the conditions he was satisfied with. He nodded and said, "Then, the 30,000 Ili soldiers I brought will listen to General Daichin." Uliji lowered his head. Although Alefu was unhappy, he only had 30,000 cavalry, so he couldn't do much. In the end, he could only agree. Just like that, the Three Alliance Army was formed. They agreed to follow General Daichin's orders to stop the Five-Star Army at the northeast front line of Turpan. 8 hours later, they had to gather at the designated location. Daichin clenched his fists and left the camp excitedly. He had to report the good news to his king. Only Uliji and Alefu were left in the tent. The latter said unhappily, "General Uliji, why did I agree to Daichin's request?" "Haha, General Alefu, there's no need to be angry. It's not wrong for us to listen to him, but if his request is a little too excessive, we can still refuse, right?" Uliji winked at Alefu and said with a smile, "An excessive order. Oh, haha." Alefu immediately began to laugh loudly. What was too much order? That depended on how he understood it. As long as he was in a bad mood, he could treat any order as too much. After all, they were enemies, so what if he disobeyed? Daichin naturally didn't know what happened after he left. He excitedly went to the palace and reported what he just said to Hardenbarter. "Good, good." Hardenbarter's face was also filled with excitement. "General Daichin, the rest is up to you. As long as you can stop the Five-Star Army's charge and stop them in the northeast region of Tulafanzai, it won't be long before I can gather the old soldiers again. At that time, we will have a strong force and we can launch a counterattack. I will wait for that day to come," Daichin said excitedly. Chapter 12-17. 70 li outside of Tulyafan City, the new army of the Five-Star Army was gathering here. More than 30,000 cavalrymen came over, covering the sky and covering the earth. They chose a flat area and started cooking. Suhi gave the order for the army to rest on the spot, while the other division commanders came to the main tent to discuss military matters. Inside the tent, Suhi stood in front of a large sand table, waving a stick in his hand. "The scouts at the front sent news that 30 li away from us, there are 40,000 cavalrymen from Tulyafan, 30,000 from Ili Beli and Yirkyan. A total of 100,000 cavalrymen have already set up camp in 3 different camps. Everyone, what do you think we should do next?" When Kalu and the other division commanders heard that there were 100,000 cavalrymen, their eyes all lit up. Clearly, there were so many enemies waiting for them to eat, and they were all very excited. However, at the same time, they knew that even if the 4th Cavalry Division Commander Chang Bo had already handed over the task of transporting the supplies to the 4th Cavalry Division and returned, there were only 30,000 cavalrymen. In terms of numbers, the difference between the two sides was still very large. 30,000 against 100,000, and the other side came prepared, and they were very familiar with the surroundings. No matter how they looked at it, this battle was not going to be easy. No one immediately spoke. Instead, after a moment of contemplation, the 1st Cavalry Division Commander Kalu asked, "General, where is the Liaodong Cavalry Reinforced Unit?" "To the west of us, near Tian Shan." Suhi looked at Kalu with a gaze full of admiration. He had already sensed something from this sentence. "To the west, the ones guarding the west of Tulyafan should be the Yirkiang Kingdom's army, right?" Kalu seemed to have thought of something as he spoke. "That's right. Does Commander Ka want the Liaodong Cavalry Reinforced Unit to launch a sudden attack from that direction?" Suhi, who had already understood Kalu's intentions, asked with a trace of a smile on his face. The other division commanders' expressions also changed at this moment, and then they began to consider the feasibility of this plan. However, very quickly, they all shook their heads lightly. It was clear that they did not think highly of this plan, nor did they have much confidence in it. In reality, everyone knew that the so-called Allied army was only formed because they had no choice but to join forces under certain circumstances. Such an army seemed to have many soldiers and generals, and its momentum was great. However, they also had a fatal flaw, which was that they were not united enough. As long as they found a suitable position, they could completely open up a gap in the shortest amount of time. According to this train of thought, Commander Kalu's decision to choose one of the paths was correct. However, although the idea was good, the difficulty of implementing it was not small. Let's not talk about anything else, just how strong was the Liaodong cavalry regiment. Everyone was not very clear about it. In addition, they only had 5,000 men, but the Yerkiang army on the west side had 30,000 cavalry. Even if their new army could attract some of their attention, it would be difficult to repel them quickly. If they couldn't end the battle quickly, the enemy would react and they might be surrounded instead. If that was the case, they only had 30,000 cavalrymen. How could they possibly be a match for the enemy's army of 100,000? For them, the best way was naturally to wait for Yang Chendong to arrive. At that time, they would not be at a disadvantage in terms of military strength, and the chances of a large-scale counterattack would be higher. Other than Kalu, the other 3 division commanders seemed to have reached a consensus. They all shook their heads and looked at Commander Su He. After expressing their attitude, they waited for the commander's orders. Su He, who did not immediately make a decision, closed his eyes. How could he not know that this was a risky move? However, he did not want to rely on Yang Chendong and Bugnam of Gojoseon for everything. It was precisely because of the disparity in military strength that if he could win this battle, it would show the strength of the new army. Otherwise, if he had the advantage in military strength, it would be a matter of course for him to win the battle. However, if he made the wrong decision, the new army would face the danger of being surrounded, heavily injured, or even destroyed. He could not make up his mind for the time being. Commander, you make the decision. However, I only want to say one thing. You cannot hesitate before making a decision for a commander. Kalu also knew that Commander Su He was in a difficult position. If it was him, he would not be able to make a decision. Therefore, he could not rush him. He could only remind him and do his duty as a division commander. As soon as Kalu's words came out, Su He, whose eyes were closed, could not help but tremble. That's right, he could not hesitate when making a decision for a commander. On the battlefield, opportunities were fleeting. Perhaps he would miss it if he was a little late. Even so, the opportunity was right in front of him. Why should he give it up? The outcome of a war was always changing. No one could know what would happen in the next moment. What a commander needed to do was to do his best in everything in front of him. Since that was the case, why should he not give it a try? The opportunity is right in front of me. I want to give it a try and show the might of the new army. As if he had made a decision, Su He opened his eyes. When he looked at everyone, there was a hint of excitement and nervousness in his eyes. The 5-star army implemented a centralized leadership system. That was, before the battle plan was formulated, the officers below had the right to propose construction. However, the final decision was still in the hands of the highest-ranking officer. When the policy fell to the new army, the one who would have the final say was naturally Commander Su He. However, this time, Su He did not make a decision. Instead, he used a negotiating tone to speak to the 4 division commanders. This showed enough respect and also proved that he was conflicted in his heart. He had not completely made up his mind. Of course, it was also possible that Su He had already made up his mind. However, it was too risky and could affect the life and death of the 4 division commanders. That was why he had no choice but to speak with such an attitude. After Su He made his intentions clear, other than Kalu's eyes that lit up, the other 3 division commanders all narrowed their eyes. They did not agree or disagree. Of course, they knew that with Su He's position, he could have made a decision without discussing with them. However, he did not do so. This in itself was a form of respect. Then, how should they respond to this respect? Should they support it? However, if there was a problem, they might lose their lives here. Should they oppose it? It seemed that the fruits of victory were big enough to attract them. Perhaps if they did not do it, They would regret it for a long time, or even for a lifetime. Seeing that everyone still did not express their opinions, Su-hee took a deep breath and said, "Everyone, I will not hide it from you. I have already received news that the new army is about to expand into a new army group. It is very likely that there will be 3 armies and a direct subordinate division. If that is the case, the military strength will reach 100,000 people." Suddenly, Su-hee threw out such a statement. It seemed to have nothing to do with the current topic, but these words caused everyone's eyes to light up. The new army was going to expand into a new army group. Did that mean that the new army could also be expanded? If that was the case, everyone's position would be promoted by a large level. The number of soldiers they could lead would also increase. It was even possible that they could exchange the 4 stars on their shoulders for a gold star. There was no soldier who did not want to be a general. This was even more so for the 4 division commanders who were only 1 step away from becoming a general. If they wanted to become a general, they had to have enough achievements to convince the masses. Right now, there was a huge contribution in front of them. What would they choose and what would they do? At this moment, everyone was shaken by Su-hee's words. In the end, Lei Chuandeng, the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, and Chang Bo, the commander of the 4th Cavalry Division, both looked at Bai Kai, the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division. In their eyes, Commander Bai Kai was like his name. He was a very talented person. Feeling the gazes of the 2 division commanders, Bai Kai's heart skipped a beat as he made a decision. "Commander, can we contact Liaodong's strengthening cavalry regiment and see how confident they are to complete this task?" "No problem. Report to Commander Tong Long of the Liaodong strengthening cavalry division." Su-hee nodded. He also wanted to see the other party's attitude. If they directly refused, then no matter how good his idea was, he would not be able to implement it. In a forest less than 100 miles away from the foot of Tianxia Mountain, people could be seen walking around. This was the temporary base of the Liaodong strengthening cavalry division. From this position, one could vaguely see the high mountains in the distance. As the commander, Tong Long knew that the highest mountain in the distance was Tianshan Mountain. "Regiment Commander, Commander Su-hee of the new 3rd Army sent a telegram." Deputy Regiment Commander Zhao Xing came to Tong Long's side with an excited expression and handed over a piece of paper. Tong Long and Zhao Xing had not been in contact with telegrams for a long time. Before this, they never thought that a small metal box could send a message thousands of miles away. Just based on this point, the 2 of them were shocked. They really didn't dare to imagine how many secrets the 5-star army had, and how powerful Yang Shi was. Luckily, the 2 were adaptable people and quickly accepted this new thing. However, every time they heard a telegram, they could not help but feel excited. "Another telegram?" As Tong Long spoke, he reached out to take the telegram. When his gaze fell on it, his hands started to tremble uncontrollably. Clearly, the contents of the telegram had made him very excited, even agitated. After a while, Tong Long's voice suddenly rose an octave. "Deputy Commander Zhao, our chance is here. The chance to prove ourselves is here. We must seize it." "Yes. We must seize it." Zhao Xing's face was also filled with excitement. However, he quickly said in a low voice, "But this mission is not easy to complete. If we don't do it well, we will be surrounded and even eaten." Once such a decision was made, there was no way out. Under normal circumstances, no one would rashly choose to do this. Especially this time, it was Commander Su-hee who asked the other party with an inquiring attitude. He did not request for the other party to express their opinion, but Tong Long and Zhao Xing still made such a decision. This was shocking and admirable. "It seems that in terms of courage, we're far inferior to these 2. The 2nd Cavalry Division's commander Bai Kai sighed. When he looked at Su-hee, he straightened his body and said, "Commander, the 2nd Cavalry Division supports this battle. Please make a decision. We also support." After Bai Kai expressed his opinion, the other 3 commanders also stood at attention and saluted. "Good, I thank you for your support. I'll now report the battle plan to the 6th young master, Su-he said with a face full of excitement. He did not forget that the disparity in strength between the two sides was too great. There was a 60% chance of losing, so he had to report it to Yang Chidong. Otherwise, if something went wrong, he would not be able to bear the responsibility even if he killed him. 150 li behind the new army, Yang Chidong was leading the troops forward. He had already received a telegram regarding the situation outside Turpan City, and he knew that there were 100,000 cavalrymen waiting for him. Regarding this, Yang Chidong naturally did not fear them at all, and he had even given the order to speed up. This was because from how he saw it, with just the new army and the Liaodong Cavalry Corps, it would be very difficult to deal with 100,000 cavalrymen. Just as the troops were speeding up, Commander Su-he of the new army sent a telegram. After hearing about their request, Yang Chidong's expression became quite complicated. This was a great risk. This time, in order to solve the problem in Ili Bali, Yang Chidong had brought along more than 100,000 cavalrymen with him. It could be said to be a huge force. With this force, no matter which faction they faced, they would have an advantage. However, if it was one against many, it would be hard to say. After all, the situation in a war is often changing in an instant. If they don't deal with it well, the situation will change drastically. If it had been someone else like Yang Chidong, the most conservative approach would have been to wait for more Neon troops to be transferred here. That way, with the advantage of military strength, they could slowly nibble away at their opponents until they won the final victory. Yang Chidong's goal was too big, and he didn't want to waste the most precious time. If possible, he certainly hoped to solve the problem here as soon as possible so that he could charge toward the next target. But although the idea was good, the reality was cruel. Especially in the situation where Ili, Turpan, and Yarkyang joined forces, plus Yesen of Wara was watching him in the dark, the situation of this war became more and more complicated. And now, an opportunity to turn passivity into initiative appeared in front of him. Facing the new army's request, Yang Chidong was caught in a dilemma for a while. Logically speaking, he thought that this battle plan was too risky. If things went wrong, more than 30,000 people would be seriously injured by the enemy's 100,000 cavalry, and it was not impossible for them to be eaten. But psychologically, he thought that this was a bold and feasible plan, because even he was amazed by this plan and felt that it was incredible, not to mention the enemy, they would definitely not think of it. To agree or not to agree, it was all up to him. Beta Persei, if the reconnaissance group and the light cavalry regiment attack with all their strength, how long will it take to meet the new army? Yang Chidong did not make a decision immediately, but wanted to understand the specific situation first. It will take at least a day and a half. Beta Persei came to a conclusion after roughly calculating the distance between the two sides. A day and a half? Yang Chidong pondered. In other words, within a day and a half, the new army would not receive any military support. Similarly, in a day and a half, the enemy would not make any preparations before the attack. Considering that it would take half a day for the Liaodong Cavalry Regiment near the Tian Shan Mountain to arrive at the battlefield, Yang Chidong could not make a decision for more than a day. Once this time passed, the enemy would be prepared, and the chances of winning would only be lower. With less than 40,000 cavalry against 100,000 cavalry, and an opponent who was very familiar with the environment, Yang Chidong decided to think about whether he should agree to this battle plan or not. Riding on the stable white dragon, Yang Chidong fell into a state of meditation with his eyes closed. At this moment, in the new army's general tent, several division commanders were anxiously pacing around. 4 hours had passed since the telegram was sent, but the reply telegram still had not arrived. No one had any idea whether to fight or not. At this moment, they were all gathered around Su-he, waiting for orders. "What does the king mean? If you don't agree, you should at least tell us so that we can let the soldiers rest." Division Commander Lei Chuaneng of the 3rd Cavalry Division was an impatient person, and he was the most talkative at this moment. "Division Commander Lei, calm down. The king's thoughts and decisions are not something that subordinates like us can guess. It is also not something that we can recklessly guess. Division Commander Bai Kai of the 2nd Cavalry Division kindly reminded Lei Chuandong. Oh, yes, yes. Lei Chuandong's expression immediately became a little ugly. What was he doing just now? Was he questioning Bugnam of Gojoseon? When he thought of what he had done, he was shocked. In the 5-star army, Yang Qindong's prestige was so high that no one was allowed to question him. This was not Yang Qindong's request, but the unanimous opinion of these generals. It was just that the situation was a little tense right now. If it was any other time, Lei Chuandong would have dared to say such words. Perhaps there would be no need for others. As Commander Su, he would be able to take him down first. Fortunately, at this moment, Su He was also anxious and felt the same as Lei Chuandong. That was why he did not reprimand him at this moment. The atmosphere in the large tent once again became tense. After an unknown amount of time, footsteps suddenly came from outside the tent. The telegraphers walked in and brought the results and answers that everyone wanted to see. Su He was the first to take the telegram. After skimming through it, he let out a long breath and then said with an excited expression, "The 6th young master has already agreed to our request. Now, please go and make your preparations. That's right, send a telegram to inform Commander Tong Long that they can set off now. General, Commander Tong Long sent us a telegram 6 hours ago, saying that he has already set off. He should be halfway there by now." The telegram operator stood at attention and reported. Actually, he had already said this before. However, Su He was too nervous at that time and did not pay attention to it. "Oh, right. Look at my brain. All right, Commander Tong Long and the others have already set off. They will reach the depths of the battlefield in 6 hours. This way, it will be midnight, which is also the time for us to launch our attack. Like this, all the division commanders will take their positions and let the soldiers fill their stomachs and prepare for battle. That's right, in order to not attract the enemy's attention, we must be tight on the inside and loose on the outside. Even if we eat, we must eat dry food and not hot food. In short, there must not be any abnormalities. Don't worry, Commander. We understand." The 4 division commanders immediately stood up and saluted. Then, they hurriedly left the tent. When Su He was left alone, he sighed and said, "6th young master, just wait for the news of our new army's victory." Chapter 12:19. The sky gradually darkened. After the commotion during the day, Turpan City gradually calmed down. With 100,000 cavalry in front of the city and the fact that it was late, many of the citizens who were preparing to leave decided to rest for the night. In this regard, King Hardenbarter didn't order them to hurry because he had received reliable information that the 5-star army had already set up camp 40 kilometers away from the city. At this moment, they were only 10 miles away from the 100,000 cavalrymen outside the city. But this 10 miles was like a mote in Hardenbarter's eyes. 30,000 cavalrymen wanting to attack 100,000 cavalrymen was simply unscientific and unrealistic. No one would think that the 5-star army had the guts to do so. If he was them, it would be a good thing if the 100,000 cavalry didn't attack first. Speaking of not taking the initiative to attack, General Daichin was very annoyed. According to him, since the 5-star army only had 30,000 people, it was time for them to attack with their superior numbers. He was confident that they could defeat the enemy and force them to retreat. However, when he explained the situation to Uli Ji and Aleifu, he was met with unanimous opposition. As reinforcements, they were only here to help evacuate Turpan City. They weren't here to attack the 5-star army. In their eyes, the best result would be for the 5-star army to retreat in the face of their 100,000-strong army. They would be able to force the enemy to retreat without shedding a drop of blood. It would be better than a chaotic battle where both sides would suffer losses. The internal disagreement caused General Daichin to lose a chance to attack first. They didn't know what kind of disaster the loss of this opportunity would bring them. Bastards, a group of short-sighted people. They will be punished sooner or later. Daichin angrily returned to his tent with a face full of anger. After getting angry, Daiqin didn't have any better ideas. No matter if it was Uli Ji or Aleifu, they weren't his subordinates. If the enemy attacked, it would be fine. In order to unify the command, they would listen to his orders. But now, asking them to attack was indeed a bit too much. Alright, then let's wait. When the main force of the 5-star army arrives, we'll have a huge battle. I want to see, since you're all cavalry and you're in our territory, what kind of waves can you cause? Daiqin said as if he was comforting himself. After that, he asked the deputy general about the 5-star army. He heard that the 5-star army had also entered a period of quietness after nightfall. It seemed that they had also entered a period of rest like him. However, before waiting for the great battle that might happen the day after tomorrow, he also gave the order that other than the necessary guards, everyone else could also rest. Just like what Yang Qindong and Su He thought, no one would think that they would attack at this time, before the army was fully assembled. It was because of this that it had the effect of catching them off guard. At this moment, in the new army's camp, all the cavalry were waiting in the dark. He was clad in armor, and had a sharp scimitar in his hand. Beside him were war-horses wrapped in thick cotton cloth. Even these war-horses had muzzles on their mouths to prevent them from making any noise. Waiting. Silently waiting. At this moment, the 30,000 cavalry warriors of the new army only had one target, which was the enemy camp 10 miles away on the right. They were waiting for the signal of the Liaodong cavalry regiment to attack. Daiqin was indeed worthy of being given such a heavy responsibility by King Hadenbar. His military skills were unquestionable. He arranged for the two armies to be 10 miles away from each other to prevent any accidents from happening. For example, if there was a sneak attack, 10 miles away would give them some time to react. But no one would have thought that the new army wasn't going to be the first to attack. The first to attack was the Liaodong cavalry regiment that came from Tian Shan. A reinforced regiment only had 5,000 cavalry. This time, they had the heavy responsibility of attacking the 30,000 cavalry camp. This was like hitting a rock with an egg. If possible, Su He didn't want to give such an order. But everything was for victory. In order to win, he had to do this. I only hope that Tonglong's regiment doesn't disappoint. Also, send out the order. Once the divisions and regiments notice that the enemy camp is in chaos, they must attack immediately. Su He looked into the distance, and was worried for Tonglong's reinforced regiment. But now that the order was given, all he could do was enter the battlefield as quickly as possible to reduce the pressure on the enemy. Late at night, the wind was cold. After a long journey, the Liaodong cavalry finally arrived at their target. Order everyone to rest for an hour and replenish their food. Regiment Commander Tonglong let out a long breath. After rushing all the way, they finally arrived. At this moment, the fatigue on his body seemed to have decreased by a lot. Regiment Commander, drink some water. Zhao Xing came over and handed over a leather bag filled with water. Thank you. Tonglong took it without any hesitation. Then, he gulped down a few mouthfuls of the wine and murmured, Satisfied. Regiment Commander, I'll charge at the front. You just need to stay behind. Zhao Xing came with a purpose. How can I do that? Tonglong rejected without even thinking about it. Then, he patted Zhao Xing's shoulder and said, I appreciate your kind intentions, but how can I change my plans so easily? But, Zhao Xing tried to persuade him. But you're the regiment commander. Our Liaodong cavalry regiment can do without anyone but the regiment commander. Bugnam of Gojoseon also said that unless it's necessary, we're not allowed to go to the front lines. You. Seeing that Zhao Xing was still trying to persuade him, Tonglong patted his shoulder and said, Now is a critical time. You should know how much pressure our regiment is under. Plus, in terms of martial arts, you're not as good as me. You have to admit that. Tonglong was a famous general in the Liaodong region. Compared to him, Zhao Xing's skills were second-rate. His advantage was that he was smart. Now that Tonglong pointed it out, he knew that there was no point in saying more. Okay, I can agree with the regiment commander going to the front lines. But you have to be careful. If there's any danger, retreat immediately. If you're not here, our Liaodong cavalry regiment doesn't need to exist anymore. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Tong Long laughed. But no matter how you looked at it, it didn't look like he knew what he was doing. Zhao Xing could only sigh and walk towards the soldiers beside the regiment commander. Since he couldn't order the regiment commander, he could only think of a way from these soldiers. The Yirkyang tribe on the left side of the camp near Tianshan was very quiet. Compared to Daiqin's anger, Alepha was in a good mood. He hummed a tune and went to sleep early. In his dream, he saw himself leading an army to defeat the 5-star army. He was leading 30,000 cavalrymen to charge forward with a momentum that could topple mountains and overturn seas. The war drums were beating, and the battle cries were shaking the heavens. It was truly a lively scene. General, General. Just as he was having a beautiful dream, he suddenly felt a large hand pushing him. This made Alepha a little unhappy, and he suddenly opened his eyes. At this moment, he realized that he was lying on a bed. At this moment, he also realized that it was just a dream. It was just a dream. Just as Alepha was about to let out a sigh of relief, he suddenly revealed a shocked expression. No, if it was a dream, then why was it so clear? Now that he had opened his eyes, why was there still the sound of iron hooves? What was going on? Before Alepha could ask, the soldier that woke him up said, General, enemy attack, enemy attack. The deputy general has already led the troops over. What? Enemy attack? Alepha immediately sat up from the bed. At first, he was confused. After a few breaths, he reacted and asked, how could it be an enemy attack? The 5-star army only has 30,000 cavalry. Would they dare to attack us? Also, the Turpan cavalry is in the middle of the army. Shouldn't they be the closest to the 5-star army? Did they already retreat? It was because his tent was right next to the Turpan cavalry camp. If the 5-star army wanted to charge over, they would have to pass through that barrier first. Alepha was caught off guard, and now that he heard that there was an enemy attack, he naturally felt helpless. No, General. The 5-star army isn't the 5-star army from the front. They came from Tianshan. The bodyguard didn't know how to explain. He could only tell what he knew and what he saw. Not the 5-star army from the front. Could it be the main force of the 5-star army is here? Oh right, how many people are there? Alepha thought of a terrifying possibility. The sky is too dark. It's impossible to see. There seems to be a lot of people. They came from all directions and their battle cries shook the sky. Because of the sky, visibility was limited. The soldier didn't know the details and could only answer based on his own guesses. When he heard that there were a lot of people, Alepha's face became very ugly. If both sides were to fight head-on, he wouldn't be afraid of anyone. But now that he wasn't on guard at all, he didn't know how much fighting strength the army could bring out. The soldier was still waiting for the general's orders. No one knew how bad the situation outside was. Perhaps if they delayed for a second, they would lose a lot more men. Looking at the general, he seemed to be in a hopeless situation. The soldier suggested, General, we can ask the Turpan army for help. This time, we are here to help them. They have the duty and responsibility to help us. Chapter 12:20. Oh yes, yes. Quick, send someone to ask General Daiqin for help, quick! At this moment, as if he had just woken up from a dream, Alepha shouted loudly. Then, the sound of hurriedly putting on armor rang out in the tent. Outside the tent, the sky was filled with flames and the sounds of people shouting and horses neighing could be heard. The moment before the charge, there was a flurry of fire arrows that burned countless tents and dealt a heavy blow to the unprepared Yirchiang army. Taking advantage of this chaos, Commander Tonglong took the lead and charged into the enemy's camp. With a swing of his sword, he beheaded 2 Yirchiang cavalrymen who were charging towards him. His bravery gave the 5-star corps cavalrymen behind him a boost of morale, greatly reducing the Yirchiang cavalrymen's morale. Who dares to sneak into the camp? You're courting death. the deputy general appeared. As Aletha's deputy, he wasn't so careless. Even when he slept with his clothes on. This allowed him to react in the shortest time possible. Once the deputy general's roar sounded, the Yirchiang cavalrymen who ran out of the tents couldn't help but be delighted. Everyone seemed to have found their backbone, and began to hold their weapons, looking for war horses and preparing to counterattack. "I think you're courting death." Tong Long, who had just killed 2 people, heard the deputy general's roar and his eyes lit up. Although he didn't know the identity of the other party, his intuition told him that the person in front of him should be someone important. With his status, killing such a person would give him a sense of accomplishment, and cause a heavy blow to the Yirchiang army. His legs clamped onto the horse's body and Tong Long rushed out. Along the way, he killed several people and rushed in front of the deputy general. "Watch my blade." The deputy general was shocked by Tong Long's speed and anxiously slashed out with his blade. Tong Long, who was already prepared, just leaned to the side on his horse and dodged the slash. Then, the saber in his hand slashed towards the other party's waist. The saber borrowed the horse's momentum, and with just one slash, there was a piercing sound as the saber and the armor came into close contact. He relied on the armor to protect his life. Even so, there was still a bloody wound that was half the length of an arm on his body. Pain enveloped the deputy general's entire body. He forced himself to take a deep breath and turned around to leave. The facts had already proven that he was no match for General Lai. He was seriously injured in just one move. If they continued to fight, he would lose his life here. There was nothing shameful about running away when they couldn't win. However, it would weaken their morale, especially when 2 armies were fighting. As a general, such an action was likely to lead to the collapse of the army. However, at this moment, in order to save his own life, the deputy general didn't think so much. He just wanted to rush out and find a place to heal himself. However, this idea of his was destined to never be realized, because Tong Long had already locked onto him with his first strike. After the 2 of them passed by each other, Tong Long turned his horse around. Seeing the scene of the deputy general fleeing, a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. He put away his saber and took out his strong bow from his back. With the help of the light from the torches around him, an arrow quickly left the bowstring and shot towards the unsuspecting deputy general. The sound of the arrow piercing through the air rang out. If it was just 2 people fighting one-on-one, the deputy general would definitely be alerted. However, the entire camp was in chaos now. How could he care about such things? The deputy general was only trying his best to escape on his horse and leave this place. Whoosh! The long arrow pierced through his body. Under the powerful force, it pierced through his chest from his back. The deputy general felt a sudden heart-wrenching pain in his body. Then, his head drooped and his hands lost strength. He fell from his horse head to the ground. 1 saber and 1 arrow took the life of the deputy general. Tong Long's bravery was indeed not to be underestimated. After killing the deputy general, he laughed and put away his strong bow. He picked up his curved horse and shouted loudly, "Your general is already dead. Why don't you surrender?" This shout was as loud as thunder, and the sound spread far and wide. Deputy Commander Zhao Xing, who was leading 1,000 cavalrymen as the reserve camp, was currently leading them in shooting arrows that were lit on fire. His mission was very simple. It was to burn as many of the Yirchiang army's tents as possible under the chaos. In the darkness of the night, they would give the impression that they had the numbers advantage. "Deputy Commander, listen! Is that the commander's voice?" One of the 5-star Army's cavalrymen with sharp ears stopped shooting the fire arrows and asked Vice Commander Zhao Xing. Zhao Xing also stopped what he was doing and listened carefully. Then, he really heard Tong Long's shout. He laughed and said, "Good. The commander is indeed brave. In such a short time, you killed the enemy's general. Come everyone, let's shoot arrows and shout at the same time. Let's maximize the effect." Regardless of whether it was Zhao Xing or Tong Long, they didn't know that it was the deputy general of the Yirchiang army. However, this didn't stop them from shouting. At the very least, the deputy general was still a general. The impact of the shout from one person to 1,000 people shouting was completely different. In just a short moment, this shout spread throughout the entire Yirkiang camp, causing the already chaotic camp to become even more chaotic. When the Yirkiang soldiers heard the shout, they weren't sure if it was true or not. However, at this moment, they would rather believe it than not. Otherwise, they would have to pay the most precious price, their lives. With the general dead, the morale of the soldiers fell to the freezing point. The Yirkiang soldiers who were still resisting with their blades started to flee in batches. They wanted to escape under the cover of the night. None of them wanted to die. When Alepha walked out of the tent in armor under the protection of his personal guards, this was the scene he saw. When he heard the shouts that the general was dead and they still didn't want to surrender, Alepha said angrily, "Bullshit, this general is still alive and well. Who said I'm dead? General, be careful with your words." A personal guard at the side immediately reached out to cover his mouth and said with a panicked expression, "What are you doing?" Alepha reached out and slapped his hand away, his face full of anger. "General, the one who died just now must be the deputy general. Now that the morale of the army is in chaos, it won't help if you stand out. Instead, you'll attract the attention of the enemy. The gains don't make up for the losses." The personal guard's mind was still clear at this moment, and he expressed his worries. Alepha, who originally wanted to punish the personal guard, was stunned when he heard this. Then, he broke out in cold sweat. Yes, at this time, the morale of the army was in chaos and there was no way to effectively counterattack. If he stood out now, not only would he not be able to solve the problem, he might even attract the attention of the enemy cavalry. If that happened, he would probably follow in the footsteps of the deputy general. At the same time, Alepha patted the personal guard's shoulder. "You did well. What do you think we should do now? General, the Han people have a saying. A gentleman doesn't stand under a collapsing wall. Let's retreat first. As long as we're here, there will be a day when Dongshan rises again." This personal guard was indeed somewhat knowledgeable. It wasn't easy for him to say such a thing at this time. These words were to Alepha's liking. He immediately nodded. "You're right. How about this, we'll retreat immediately." As he spoke, Alepha even took the initiative to take off the armor he just wore. Clearly, he didn't want to expose himself because of this set of clothes. However, what happened next proved that Alepha was thinking too much. Because from start to finish, Tong Long didn't have the intention to kill him. Their goal was to create chaos here and force Yirchiang's cavalry to retreat. Then, they would attack the Turpan cavalry in the middle of the army. Yes, this was the true goal of the Liaodong Cavalry Corps. After suffering once, General Daichin became much more careful in his actions. Even if the 5-star army didn't make any moves, he still arranged for many soldiers to be on guard. This was to prevent the 5-star army from launching a sneak attack. For this reason, Suhi sent out hundreds of cavalry scouts, but the result was exactly the same. It was impossible to break into the battlefield from the front, which was guarded. This was also why the new army didn't attack first. Instead, they let the Liaodong Cavalry Corps fire the first arrow. If the Turpan cavalry didn't create chaos, they wouldn't have a chance. And whether or not they could create chaos all depended on the Liaodong Cavalry Corps. With only 5,000 cavalry, not only did they have to break through Yirchiang's 30,000 cavalry camp, they also had to deal a heavy blow to the Turpan cavalry. From this, it could be seen how difficult this mission was. This was also where Suhi's worries came from. Fortunately, Tong Long had won the first battle. He had caught the Yirchiang cavalry by surprise and even killed their deputy general. He had completely disrupted the morale of the army and perfectly completed the first step of the battle plan. Tong Long sighed as he watched the Yirchiang soldiers, who had turned from cavalry to infantry, scurrying away like rats. What a pity! How many prisoners were there? Unfortunately, he still had things to do and couldn't stop to take care of them. A pained expression flashed across Tong Long's heart as he pointed his saber forward, pointing at the Turpan camp in the distance as he shouted, "Brothers of the reinforced regiment, charge with this regiment, commander! Charge! Turpan camp. The Yirchang camp on the left suddenly lit up with flames. This naturally shocked everyone. General Daiqin, who was still sleeping, jumped up and rushed out of the camp. He looked to the west and his eyes flashed with worry. Report, the 5-star army suddenly charged into the Yirchang camp. The two sides are fighting. A scout galloped to the front of General Daiqin and reported. Scout again. I want to know how many people they have. Daiqin said without changing his expression. Report, General Aleifus sent people to ask for help. He said they can't hold on anymore. After a while, another scout galloped to report. Chapter 12:21. Anger flashed across Daiqin's face. The 30,000 cavalry couldn't hold on anymore? In his opinion, this was simply because Astral didn't want to resist and didn't want to fight head-on with the 5-star army. It was just a way to preserve his strength. Even if we can hold on, we still have to ignore them. Daiqin snorted coldly. How could it be so easy to win without putting in any effort? Daiqin believed that even if the 30,000 cavalry met with a sudden attack, it would only be a temporary panic. As long as they stayed true to their hearts, they would be able to quickly turn the situation around. There was nothing to be worried about. What he was worried about was the fact that he didn't understand. Who were these 5-star cavalry that suddenly appeared? How many people were there? How did they appear on the west side without anyone noticing? The answer to this question was quickly revealed. This was because Tong Long had already led 4,000 cavalrymen towards the Turpan camp. Because there were already scouts keeping an eye on the situation, the moment Tong Long and the others made their move, they were immediately discovered by the scouts of the Turfan army and reported back. On the way back, they met some Turpan cavalry who were guarding the front. When they heard that someone was coming from the side, they immediately went up to meet them. On the battlefield, there was a saying that the commander's orders were not to be given out. Now that the 5-star army was right in front of them, the Turpan cavalry in charge of guarding the front couldn't just sit there and do nothing. In reality, even if they didn't meet them, Tong Long would have brought his army over. This was his important mission. Good timing! Seeing that the enemy was about to meet them, Tong Long laughed loudly. Then, with less than 4,000 men, they charged straight at the 3,000 cavalry. With the advantage in numbers and the imposing killing intent, both sides left behind many corpses and blood after just one clash. The enemy is so strong, request for reinforcements. In the same clash, the Turpan general, who had lost hundreds of cavalrymen, sensed an immense sense of danger. As he swung his saber through the air, he yelled loudly to the soldiers beside him. The personal guard turned around and rode away. Not long after, a group of 3,000 Turpan cavalrymen who were also tasked with guarding the defensive line arrived. As they left, the Turpan defense fell into a weakened state. The new army scouts who were in charge of understanding the situation shot out a signal gun into the sky. A bright red light shot into the sky, appearing so eye-catching and bright in the silent night. Let's go. In front of the new army tent, General Su He finally received the signal to act. He immediately roared and the 30,000 5-star army cavalry charged out like a pack of wolves. However, unlike before, they didn't shout. Under the heavy protection of the horses' mouths and hooves, the 30,000 cavalry charged forward like ghosts, approaching the Turpan front lines. It was only a distance of 10 li. The new army cavalry, who were prepared, only took 5 to 6 minutes to charge out. However, these 5 to 6 minutes were like torture for the Liaodong cavalry regiment. General Daiqin, who had been injured once, was very careful this time. Just the cavalry at the front of the camp alone numbered 15,000. They were split into 5 groups, each of which was 3,000 cavalry. When Tong Long brought the 4,000 cavalry and charged in, a total of 3 groups of 9,000 Turpan cavalry entered the battlefield. With double the number advantage, they quickly surrounded the Liaodong cavalry regiment. Not only that, Daiqin, who had received the news, had already called all the cavalry in the camp. He arranged for the generals to come to the camp for a meeting while ordering all the cavalry to put on their armor and get on their horses. This time, Daichin's reaction was extremely fast. Even though he hadn't seen through the 5-star Army's plan of attack, he relied on his advantage in numbers and made up his mind to take down the thousands of 5-star Army cavalry that he had surrounded. "General Dan, you bring 5,000 cavalry to stabilize the northern line, in case the 5-star Army's main force suddenly invades. General Tong, you bring 5,000 cavalry to continue the encirclement of the 5-star Army. This time, we can't let any of them escape." The other generals quickly prepare for battle and wait for the order to attack. At the same time, send someone to contact General Wu Liji and tell him to also prepare to attack the 5-star Army. Daichin quickly made a series of arrangements, and the generals quickly headed out of the tent. Then, a messenger came to report that on the main battlefield, the 5-star Army had indeed launched an attack. 2 groups of 6,000 cavalry were fighting with their lives on the line. They came so fast. General Daichin's eyes flashed with surprise, but he quickly calmed down. He was confident in his cavalry. As long as they could hold on for a while, once the 5-star Army was completely wiped out, he would be free to deal with the enemy at the front. At that time, with the help of the 30,000 cavalrymen from Ili, a beautiful counterattack wouldn't be a problem for them to achieve victory. At this time, on the main battlefield, the intense battle had just begun. The new army was already prepared. Under the cover of the night, they were only discovered when they were a mile away from the Turpan cavalry. Then, both sides first engaged in a battle of long-range archery. After both sides suffered casualties, the close combat battle began. On the side of the new army, the one in charge of the vanguard was the new army's 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Kalu. At the time, he was the 1st Regiment commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. This time, Kalu sent him to reinforce the reinforced regiment. This was enough to prove that he valued this ally very much. The moment Kalu gave the order, the other officers from the division headquarters were all stunned. One of them said with a face of worry, "Wu Ba is leading the main force of our 1st Cavalry Division. Now, there are still 5,000 Turpan cavalry coming at us. Why don't we send other regimental commanders to rescue the reinforced regiment?" "Other regiments? Who's up to the task?" Kalu asked without any explanation. Then, he shook his head and said, "This division commander knows what you are thinking. With Wu Ba gone, the pressure on us will definitely increase. However, this division commander still has to do this. When we came here, the division commander gave an absolute order that the reinforced regiment must be rescued. They are risking their lives for us. If something really happens, how will others look at us? How will Bugnam of Gojoseon look at us?" After asking a few questions in one breath, Kalu saw that the other officers seemed to have something to say. He directly waved his hand and said, "All right, this division commander's orders cannot be changed. If you have any objections, you can convey them to the division commander after the battle." On the battlefield, the division commander had the final say. It was precisely because of this that the morale of the army could be guaranteed. As for whether there would be different opinions on the battlefield, that would be decided by the division commander. Since Kalu had said this, even if the other officers had different opinions, they could only obey. After giving this order, Kalu's gaze involuntarily turned towards the Ili camp on the other side. According to the battle plan formulated by the new army, the Liaodong Cavalry Reinforced Regiment was responsible for messing up the Yarkiang camp and charging towards the Turpan camp. The 1st Cavalry Division was responsible for attacking the Turpan camp from the front. These plans revolved around one goal, and that was to create an opportunity for the other 3 cavalry divisions of the new army to attack the Ili camp. Chapter 12:22. Since it was an allied army, the most important thing was the alliance. If this alliance could be broken, the 3 allied armies would become 3 isolated armies. At that time, the 5-star armies would be able to attack whoever they wanted to attack when faced with their weakened enemies. Breaking the alliance naturally became the most important issue. After the discussion, the new three armies set their sights on their old rival, the 30,000 cavalrymen of Ilibao. The reason why they chose them was because they were the closest to Ming. If they attacked from there, they wouldn't have to worry about enemies suddenly appearing. Secondly, they had defeated the Ili cavalry before. They knew the strength of the 5-star army. With this shadow, they would have a higher chance of defeating them. That's right, defeating them, not defeating them. Rather than injuring 10 fingers, the new Third Army would rather lose some soldiers and horses. This time, they wanted to deal a heavy blow to Ili's 30,000 cavalrymen. Only then would they be able to defeat the so-called Allied army. It had to be known that not long ago, the 1st Cavalry Division had taken over Hobokseli City. It was equivalent to cutting off the Ili cavalry's retreat to the north. If they heavily injured the Ili cavalry here, they would definitely become very obedient. When they couldn't even take care of themselves, the so-called Allied army would collapse on its own. Just as Kalu was looking at the Ili cavalry camp, the new army's commander Suhi was leading 3 cavalry divisions to surround the Ili cavalry division. Relying on the concealment of the horses' hooves and mouths, when the 3 cavalry divisions suddenly appeared in front of the Ili cavalry camp, it gave Wuliji a big fright. When the flames in the west reached the sky, he had already gotten out of bed. He put on his armor and began to gather the troops. Following that, news spread that the 5-star army had begun to break through the enemy and attack the Turpan cavalry camp. When he received this news, Wuliji's heart was sweeter than honey. In his eyes, the situation was very clear. This time, the 5-star army's target was definitely Turpan and Yarkyang. He could stay out of it, and watch it all as a bystander. Just now, General Daichin sent someone to ask for help. Of course, he agreed, but he didn't send a single soldier. From the bottom of his heart, it was true that the 5-star army was his enemy, but what about the Turpan kingdom? Wouldn't it be great to be able to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight? Wouldn't it be great to be able to reap the benefits while the two enemies fought? He wasn't stupid enough to immediately send troops to help Turpan. Of course, due to their relationship as allies, he would definitely send out his troops. However, he had to grasp the timing well. He had to wait until the Turfan army could no longer hold on before he made his move. This way, he would be able to deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army, and also gain the reputation of saving the Turfan army. Wouldn't it be the best of both worlds? Wuliji had fought with the 5-star army before and even attacked the first city with the Wara. He was much clearer about the strength of the 5-star army compared to the other 2 countries. This was an opponent that wasn't to be trifled with. They were well equipped, and their soldiers were well trained. How could such an opponent be defeated so easily? It wasn't too late to wait for his allies to exhaust the strength of the 5-star army before he made his move. Let's fight, the more intense the better. In the end, the winner will only be us. Wuliji grinned and let out a laugh. However, this laughter didn't last long. Soon, a scout appeared in front of him and said with a panicked expression. The 5-star army suddenly came and had already clashed with the cavalry at the first line of defense. However, because the enemy had too many people, the front line couldn't hold on much longer. What? How is this possible? When Wuliji heard this news, he stood there as if he was petrified. He didn't move for more than 10 breaths of time. It wasn't until the deputy beside him reminded him that he came back to his senses. Then, he walked towards the high platform in the middle of the camp. He wanted to see with his own eyes how many soldiers and horses the 5-star army had sent. It would have been better if he didn't take a look. Now that he took a look, he saw that under the night sky, there were flashing torches everywhere. He could hear the sounds of charging and killing. He felt that the enemy's cavalry wasn't less than his. 30,000 against 30,000, and they were completely unprepared. Wuliji could already guess the outcome of the battle. Because of this, he had a frightened expression on his face. After he came down from the high platform, he sent soldiers to stop the 5-star army from approaching. At the same time, he ordered people to ask General Daichin for help. In front of the Turfan tent, Daichin couldn't sit still anymore. He was currently in front of the tent observing the situation outside. Because of the moonlight, other than the sounds of killing and the movement of the torches, he couldn't see any useful information. However, he still didn't move. He believed that as long as he sat on the horse, it would be a symbol. As long as the soldiers saw him, they wouldn't panic and their morale would increase greatly. Daiqin, who had a mighty aura, was like a door god, unmoving like a mountain. It indeed gave the nearby Turfan cavalry a boost in morale. Many of them became braver because of this. They just wanted to perform better in front of the general. Although it was night time and their performance might not be seen by the general, many of them still held onto a fluke mentality, and continued to do so. Not long later, good news came continuously. The 5-star army that came from the west was completely surrounded and could be destroyed at any time. The 5-star army's main force that came from the front was also blocked outside. Other than a few 2,000 war horses that managed to charge through the defensive circle, the rest of the 5-star army cavalry were blocked outside. Haha, good! This news caused Daiqin to be overjoyed. To be able to completely destroy a 5-star army, this was definitely a great achievement. When the king found out, he would definitely be heavily rewarded. At the same time, it would be a heavy blow to the 5-star army. It would let them know that the Turfan kingdom wasn't a pushover. Just as he was in a good mood, the young general that Wuli Ji sent to ask for help came in front of Daiqin. The moment he saw Daiqin, he knelt on the ground and begged. "General, our camp is being attacked by the 5-star army. Please send reinforcements because we are allies." Oh? This news first made Daiqin's entire body tremble. Then, his expression froze. However, after a few breaths of time, his face blossomed with an unnoticeable smile. "This young general, you said that your camp is being attacked by the 5-star army. But how many enemies are there?" So many, I can't even count." Hearing this, the young general raised his head and said in panic. However, in Daiqin's eyes, he mistakenly thought that the panic was because the general was scared of him. Even if Wu Liji was trying to deceive him, he shouldn't have sent someone more mature. Thus, he coldly snorted and said, "All right, this general already knows about this matter. Please go back and tell Wu Liji that reinforcements will be arriving soon." "Yes, thank you, General Daiqin." The young general let out a sigh of relief, as if he had completed an important mission. He hurriedly bowed and left. After the young general left, the other Turfan generals couldn't help but ask, "General, are you really going to send reinforcements?" "Send what?" "When we asked for reinforcements, they didn't send a single soldier." "What bullshit 5-star army's main force attacking? It's clearly an excuse not to send reinforcements." Whatever, we don't need to care about them. With our current strength, we can completely take the credit. We don't need other people's help." Daiqin completely misunderstood. Of course, he couldn't be blamed for this. Who would have thought that the 5-star army's plan was to create a diversion? Furthermore, they first attacked Yarkyang Kingdom, then Turfan. Would they really attack Ili in the end? No one would believe that the pitiful Wuli Ji would have to face the attacks of the new army alone. From the start of the new army's attack, it was extremely ferocious. In their hearts, they were clear that to create this opportunity, they had completely sacrificed the Liaodong cavalry regiment's benefits. Since their allies were willing to help them, they obviously couldn't just watch them die. This required them to increase the speed of their attacks. First, they had to heavily injure Ili, then they would be free to deal with Turfan's main force. Naturally, there was another important reason. That was, no one dared to say whether Turfan would suddenly send reinforcements to help Xiao Ili's main force. If they really did that, then they would truly be in danger. With these two main reasons, the new army's 3 main cavalry divisions, from the moment they started attacking, they were like brave giants. Anyone who dared to block their path would only have one result: death. Without any preparation, facing the fierce attacks of the 5-star army, the Turfan army was forced to retreat step by step. At this time, Wuli Ji made an even more wrong decision. That was, he didn't send his entire army forward at once. Instead, he sent out 2,000 to 3,000 cavalry at once. He wanted to stop the attacks of the 5-star army. He wanted to leave behind enough troops to wait for the cavalry from Turfan Kingdom to join forces with them to counterattack the five-star army. It was impossible for reinforcements to come. After the battle lasted for more than an hour, Wuliji finally understood this point clearly. Less than half of his 30,000 cavalrymen were left after this battle. I can't wait any longer. Seeing that the reinforcements from Turfan still hadn't arrived, Wuliji's eyes flashed with anger. The distance between the two camps was only 5 li. If they rushed at full speed, they would arrive in an instant. However, after such a long time, not to mention a large batch of reinforcements, there wasn't even a shadow of reinforcements. At this moment, Wuliji had completely lost his confidence. Chapter 12:23. Hearing Wuliji say that they couldn't wait any longer, the other generals beside him all rubbed their palms together. They didn't have any history or experience fighting against the five-star army. In their short-sighted eyes, it seemed that their elite cavalry was the most tyrannical force under the heavens. They even yearned to fight against the five-star army and obtain military merits. However, it was clear that they misunderstood Wuliji's words. When he said that they couldn't wait any longer, it wasn't that he wanted to fight to the death with the five-star army, but rather that he was prepared to retreat. If it wasn't Turpan's capital behind him, but Ili country's capital, Wuliji would fight to the death. However, now wasn't the time to use his full strength. Since this battle was destined to be lost, what he needed to do was to bring more cavalry back and protect Ili country. Pass on the order. Wuliji spat out these 2 words like a popping bean. Following this, the young generals beside him all became excited. What Air said next made these people's fighting spirit fall into a bottomless abyss. Pass down the order to retreat. Retreat? A young general thought that he had misheard and asked with a doubtful tone. Yes, retreat. We don't need to fight to the death with the five-star army in order to protect Turpan's capital. Now I order the entire army to retreat. Not only did Wuliji decide to retreat, but he also decided to withdraw from this so-called alliance. He could see that everyone wasn't of one mind. Whenever they encountered a situation, they would only protect themselves and fight for themselves. What was the use of this alliance? What was the point of this alliance? Although doing this would cause the Turpan army to fall into danger, and even Turpan's capital behind them would be in the same situation. At the same time, it could affect the overall situation of the 3 countries' alliance. However, Wuliji didn't think so much at this moment. If he insisted on staying, it was very likely that he would be completely surrounded by the five-star army, or even be completely wiped out. This was a responsibility that he couldn't bear. Wuliji decisively gave the order to retreat. Without waiting for the new army's main force to surround them, the front army turned around and fled. This caused the new army to lose a chance to wipe them out. Mother Faster, he runs really fast. Why don't we chase after him? The 3rd Cavalry Division's commander, Lei Chuandang, spoke with a displeased expression. He was in the middle of a killing spree when the enemy fled. They didn't even bring any food or military supplies with them. More than 10,000 captives were left inside and outside the tent. This was enough to prove his determination. There's no need for that. Commander Su, he shook his head. A cornered beast would still put up a desperate fight. At this time, if they really caught up with Ili's cavalry, they would have no way to retreat. If Ili went all out, it was very likely that both sides would suffer. This was not what he wanted. Not to mention that the 1st Cavalry Division and the Liaodong Cavalry Regiment were in danger, especially the latter. Su he had to be saved. Su he had done so much for him, so it was reasonable for him to do his best to help. 4th Division, leave 2 regiments to clean up the battlefield. The rest of you, follow me and charge into the Turpan camp. When they heard that there was a big battle to fight, the other 3 division commanders' eyes lit up. They immediately replied, Yes, sir. The Liaodong Cavalry Regiment. At this time, they were completely surrounded. As the first to charge out, Tong Long was covered in blood. Most of it was the enemy's, and some of it was his own. Since he suddenly appeared in the battle with Yirchiang, Tong Long hadn't stopped killing for a moment. Just the number of enemy cavalry who died in his hands was at least 60 to 70. There were even more who were injured. This fully demonstrated his reputation as a fierce general of Liaodong. However, at the same time, he also paid a big price. For example, of the 4,000 cavalry that charged out with him, there were now less than 500 left. Moreover, all of them were injured. Some were only holding on with their last breath. Even if their injuries were healed, it was impossible for them to gallop on horseback. After paying such a huge price, the results were satisfactory. Not only did they break through the camp of Yirchiang's 30,000 cavalrymen and force them to retreat, they also attracted the attention of 11,000 cavalrymen from the Turf Kingdom. Furthermore, they were able to keep a close eye on them, preventing them from being distracted. Facing 11,000 with 4,000, and being surrounded, Tong Long wasn't made of iron. The cavalry he brought weren't all as brave as he was. During this period of time, there were two huge dangers. However, one of them was blocked by Zhao Xing and the remaining 1,000 cavalry. When the second danger came, the new Army 1st Cavalry Division's 1st Regiment commander, Wu Ba, brought 2,000 cavalry and blocked it. With the appearance of two reinforcements, the pressure on Tong Long decreased by a lot. Just as they were about to charge out and kill their way out, another 3,000 Turpan cavalry came and joined the encirclement. At this point, Tong Long had already restrained 14,000 Turpan cavalry. This was already more than a third of Daiqin's forces. Another 3,000 cavalry surrounded them. No matter if it was Tong Long, Zhao Xing, or Wu Ba, their faces all became ugly. After exchanging glances, they all raised their heads and laughed out loud. Good, since that's the case, let's fight to the death. At most, we'll be men again in 18 years. Tong Long's wild laughter sounded so heroic in the night. That's right. 18 years later, we'll be heroes again. But even if we die, we can't let our enemies have an easy time. Next, let's see who kills more people. Leader Wu Ba also had a crazed smile on his face. This time, he brought a whole 2,000 cavalry over. However, there were less than 100 people left by his side. According to the rules of the army, when an army lost more than half of its members, they should retreat from the battlefield. However, his entire army was almost wiped out. Seeing the soldiers who had followed him for so many years leaving one after another, Wu Ba only had one thought in his mind, and that was to avenge his fallen comrades. He wanted to kill as many people as he could. Only then would he have the face to see his comrades who had left before him after he went to the Yellow Springs. Let's fight, who's afraid of who? Zhao Xing, who was the weakest in terms of personal strength but also had the guts, also roared. This was completely different from his usual scholarly side. From this, it could be seen that the cruel and bloody battlefield could change a person. Zhao Xing wasn't much better off. Of the last 1,000 cavalry he brought, there were less than 200 left. Luckily, because he joined the battle late, he only had a blade wound on his body. The three generals looked at the enemies surrounding them. At this moment, they no longer cared about life and death. In their eyes, there was only one word: revenge. At this point, the Turpan army wasn't much better off. Of the 14,000 troops, there weren't even half left. However, there were still over 5,000 people left. The ones surrounding them were still the few hundred 5-star army who were on the verge of death. They still held a significant advantage. General Tong, who was in charge of surrounding the 5-star army, stared with his eyes wide open. He was truly shocked by the performance of Tong Long and the others. He originally thought that with several times the number of the enemy, and the fact that they were surrounded, it shouldn't be a problem to deal with the enemy. However, after fighting for so long, not only did he suffer heavy losses, he even suffered more than the enemy. This made him feel extremely humiliated. Now that he saw the enemy still shouting while surrounded, how could he let it go? He immediately pointed his saber forward and shouted, "Go, kill them all, kill them all! Kill!" General Tong was angry. The cavalry below took advantage of the fact that they had more people. After a loud shout, they all charged forward. At this moment, swords flashed and war horses galloped forward. A life-and-death battle was once again played out. Relying on the advantage of numbers, a 5-star army cavalry would often have to face 3 to 4 enemies or even more. In such a situation, death was inevitable. The only difference was how many enemies they could kill. With the thought that killing one was enough and killing 2 was worth it, the 5-star army cavalry soldiers didn't care about life and death. With the determination to fight to the death, they didn't defend and launched a final attack on the Turpan cavalry. Their morale was still high, and they waved their sabers resolutely. But after all, they weren't made of iron. After using up most of their strength, the sabers in their hands gradually lost control. Even the horses under their butts were letting out muffled snorts. That was a sign that they were about to use up all their strength and were about to lose all their strength. However, at this moment, no one cared so much. When all the soldiers were prepared to die, in their eyes, death was no longer that scary. In their eyes, there was only killing the enemy. Only killing the enemy. In the face of death, the hundreds of soldiers of the 5-star army burst forth with their greatest potential. Many of them weren't killed by the Turpan cavalry, but by the exhaustion of their bodies. In the end, they couldn't even ride their horses and fell to the ground, unconscious. Among them was Commander Tong Long. When he launched the counterattack, he was the one who took the lead. Relying on his own bravery, he swung his saber almost instinctively, cutting down 4 sturdy Turkmen cavalrymen. When he swung his saber for the 5th time, due to the decrease in speed, it was finally blocked. Under the powerful rebound force, he lost his balance and fell off his warhorse. "Commander!" Tong Long's fall from his horse attracted the shouts of more than 10 soldiers who saw this scene. This shout also greatly stimulated the other 5-star army cavalry soldiers. They charged forward as if they had gone mad. Some of them didn't even have the strength to hold their sabers, but they still used their bodies to open up a path of blood. It was all for the sake of protecting Tong Long, who they didn't know whether he was dead or alive, from being trampled and killed by the Turpan cavalry. However, there was a limit to their madness, especially when they didn't have the strength to do so. As more and more 5-star army cavalry fell to the ground, the encirclement of the Turpan cavalry became smaller and smaller. In the end, Wu Ba and Zhao Xing were surrounded in an extremely small area with less than 50 cavalry soldiers.